It's 1 o'clock. I'm going to call the work session into order. I don't believe there's any change to the group. So if we're going to go ahead and start the work session, every quarter we try to give a presentation to the board, just an update by the key directors of the facility, and make sure that if there are any questions about what the future looks like or anything that's gone on in the last quarter, although really this is forward looking. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to have Cody Lund, the Assistant Executive Director. He'll discuss food, beverage, and operations. Oh, look, we've got a quorum too. Cody?
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the board. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to give a brief update on events, F&B, operations, talk a little bit about logistics, our culture as well. From the event side, some exciting stuff are happening. Some positive numbers are coming out that I'm seeing. Event and sales has entered 123 events into our USI system since the first of the year. And that's a good indicator. We've had 34 pieces of business that were added into the systems in just this month alone of March, 46 events in February, and 43 in January. That is compared to 39 total all last quarter. So the previous quarter, we had entered in 19 in October, 11 in November, or sorry, yeah, 19 in November or October, 9 in November, and 11 in December for a total of 39. So we've almost tripled that number, and we still have the rest of this month to go. So an indicator that we are booking events and getting back to business. We did meet with Natasha from the Central District Health Department last Monday, and it was a very positive meeting. We had her on site to take a look at our facility, just to ask some questions about the groups filling out attestations and the application process to see where we could guide our clients a little bit clearer. They stated that our clean and safe plan was one of the best out there. So that was a good indicator for us that they had seen what we were doing and had faith in what we were putting out there. The big takeaway from that meeting for me was physical distancing is king. They didn't give us any limits on the ability of people per room as long as physical distancing can be maintained. We've received several approvals actually over the past week and a half from CDH on several events, which give us a lot of faith that things are returning to somewhat, not necessarily normal, but back to at least the ability to do some business in a decent number. We have the IAFCJ, which is the Apostolic Church Conference, which is approximately 100 or 1,200 attendees for early April. That's an estimated 500 room nights for that event alone. We did also receive the approval for Washington State Hostage Negotiators Association in early May. That's approximately 350 attendees, and that's in rounds of 6 with Crescent style. So those are a little closer together groups as well. So we were excited to see that was approved. Idaho Youth Ranch, which is Wine, Women, and Shoes, was approved yesterday. And that's rounds of 6 for 360 as well for early May. And then Tom and Jerry was just approved right prior to lunch today. And that's a mid-May event, another multi-day large 400-person event with breakfast and lunch. So some food and beverage component to that. So with all of that coming through, just as of in the past, like I said, week and a half, we're seeing a lot of faith from Central District Health in our ability to host events. Getting those attestations approved from CDH has been a good sign. So we expect to see more of that kind of behavior. And that kind of is making me think of, we're looking at the size of our event team. As when we were pre-COVID, our previous event team consisted of 5 full-time event managers and 1 event coordinator. And as of right now, we're currently at 2 full-time event managers and 1 event coordinator. So we're continually looking at that kind of when the cup is going to start filling up to the point where we need to bring on additional bodies. And we're starting to see some of those indicators based on the numbers that I just spoke to on that.
Madam Chair, Cody.
Yes, sir.
What's the process? If I want to have a meeting at Boise Center, what happens?
So you would fill out an application through CDH, their website. They have an attestation form that explains the details of what your event, what kind of safety protocols. They do like to see maps included with that, which usually we help provide our client with those.
So I go to them before I come to you.
Yes, in most cases, and sometimes it's kind of a tag team effort in some sense, because those maps are important in showcasing how the room is going to look to the client, and then as well the CDH. So we provide them some guidance at that point in time to provide what a map might look like for a group size. But other than that, at that point, it is all the events first working with CDH and then coming to us after that.
And how much time do they need?
2 weeks is ideal for them. Anything outside of 2 weeks or inside of that 2 weeks gets very close to where they can't guarantee any kind of approval outside of 2 weeks. But really, most of these groups are about a month out from when they're getting approval at this point.
Natasha did mention that her goal is a 24-hour to 48-hour turnaround.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the event side before I kind of move on from that? Okay. I just kind of use this as a celebration moment. I know I've talked about it before and previous, and we've kind of highlighted it, but we continue to get certified in USI, which is the system that tracks all of our events and data. We are officially the most certified facility in the nation now that has received over $6,000 in credits that can be applied to trainings, additional modules, other stuff within the system. So our team took this as an opportunity, and I don't think USI ever expected anybody to jump on that many of the opportunities as we did. So I think that's probably a second guess on their part on how much we earned in credits back, but proud of the team, and overall took a great pride in the fact that they all used a little bit of that slower time to get more educated on the system that we're using. And I've seen the benefits and downstream from all departments. So appreciate everybody's efforts on that. From the food and beverage side, lots of stuff going on. That's kind of a good indicator, similar to the meetings with CDH. We've put in a bid to do an offsite for Albertsons Open in August. Historically, we've done that event here, but we actually have another event booked. That's about $55,000 in revenue, and that's an offsite event, so that'd be a great piece of business. We're just waiting to hear back on that proposal. We've also put in a bid to feed one of the football teams this November that's playing BSU. That's going to be about $30,000 in revenue as well. So those are both good pieces of business that we're starting to see indicators that people are asking for some bids on. The Democrat Party, we recently did a virtual hybrid event with them, or actually mostly virtual. But what it was is the culinary team put together some charcuterie boxes, about 100 of them, and we sent them out all over the state. We got those out and heard great feedback on the quality. It had some meats and cheeses, stuff in there that was blast chilled and then sent out and shipped and was delivered by the next day. So that was a success and shows that we can get creative with the food and beverage, even in using the virtual or the hybrid environment. I'd also highlight, and I'm sure this will get spoke about at some point as well, we did Butte and Boise Curbside this year, which was a different variation of Butte and Boise. That was a very successful event, and I think it's going to set us up very, very well to return to in-person. I'll let Pat speak more to this, but it was very well received from several of our family members, staff, friends, and the community in general. It got a lot of Facebook traction and posts on that as well, so I'm sure you'll hear more about that. Any questions on the food and beverage side before I move on? Okay. Operationally, we've hired a full-time operations supervisor, and that's Peter LaGrange. He was previously employed at the arena next door. He's worked for Breckenridge. He has some experience in Parks and Rec, which gives him a great operational background. Actually, that's Jared Burkhalter, one of our facility members, who had also worked in ops, had that same background. So they see some great skill set in Peter, and we're happy to have him join in within the next couple of weeks, our operations team. We're also currently in the process of starting to replace carpet, wall covering, and paint in 110 and 120. So those, if you're getting in the building or are here right now, you're going to start to see some of that work being started. They've started to take off the cove base inside of 110, 120, and they're going to continue to work on those. Those are all budgeted capital items for this year. So our goal is to have that done by May 5th, which is before several of these events that got approved from CDH. So we'll get them nice and ready to go for those groups. For those that were aware, have been around the building for about the past month and a half, our escalator project in the main lobby has been completed. What this was, it was a long-term issue that was lingering out there based on install. The two parties, as far as the Otis Elevator Company and then our general contractor, kind of took the lead and made it right. So they came in and did what they needed to do to rectify the issue. And we finally got that all put back together actually just this last week. So it's nice to have our main lobby back together before having all these people in the building. We continue to look at the Boise Center East capital plan as that building is approaching about 5 years old, and usually about 5 years is when your first life cycle and some of your bigger items start to hit, as well as 7 years is when we tend to do carpet, wall coverings. So we're starting to have meetings about that. We've had a year of downtime, so we're kind of estimating whether or not we need to shift and push things out a little bit further. And that's also, as we begin to look at those calendars that far out, we want to create the availability for sales to be able to sell the space to bigger conventions. So we're starting to kind of get into that future planning of Boise Center East and looking at how to best manage that space. We did get a new IT service provider in the last month. That's Syringa Network. They expanded our bandwidth to about 2 gigs, and that was completed in the last month. So that's going to allow us to double the capacity of what we've got, and the ability for future expansion is there with Syringa as well. So we'll continue to work closely with them. We finished the Zoom room, which is ready to go in 200. And that what that is up in 200 boardroom. We've added some additional cameras, PTZ cameras that are similar to what we use inside this room for this meeting. That room will become more future-proof for hybrid or in-person meetings as we go into the future. I think even future board meetings, you guys will see some of that technology in use for your meetings. So we're happy to see that completed. And then AV continues to be a strong source of revenue for Boise Center from the usage of 430. We continue, you'll see that on one of the slides today, but we continue to see great increase in interest in that space. And now it's starting to get to the point where now we've got groups coming back, so we need to get mobile and possibly have that space back for some of the event space, and then have the ability to put it back into a studio real quick. So the team is working on the logistics of that plan. I do want to highlight safety because I think this is a very important note to make. I want to knock on wood before I say it because it does seem like every time we talk about safety, something weird will happen. But we have had no claims hit our insurance in the past year. That's with a smaller team, so fully aware that we've had less people working. But considering the nature of what we still do, our warehouse, the scissor lifts, the forklifts, the equipment that we run, having 0 claims in the past year is a great sign. And it's also a great, it speaks well to our culture and what we do as being safety is one of our values and making sure it's a commitment to the team as a whole. So we continue to focus on that. We've got some planned trainings based on the lockdown ability, which I've spoke about to the board before. And based on what's going on around the world, even yesterday and previous in the week, that lockdown ability, I think, is going to be something that's key as we bring staff back. We plan on doing a lot of trainings on how that would be operable and how that will work. And again, that's just something that's going to be top of mind as we're paying attention to what's happening around the US and around the world. With that safety training comes scissor lift, forklift, a lot of that stuff that's just natural hazards in the workplace. So we continue to focus our efforts on those. The team actually just did some recent FEMA trainings on communication that they thought was very valuable. I was speaking to Jennifer, our operations manager, about, and that's actually kind of timely considering the group we have coming up with the Apostolic Church. There may be some barriers for communication in that one as well. So a lot going on in the operations department, kind of behind the scenes, but they're doing a great job. And then I'll allow any questions there from the operational stuff from the board.
Cody, do you do any dry runs on testing any of those scenarios?
Tabletop right now, and it's really kind of a walk before you run when it comes to those type of drills. We actually have a long-term plan to work with the city of Boise and the police department and their emergency response to use our facility as a possible training site. But what they do is they kind of gave me that lingo of you got to learn to crawl, then walk, then run. And that in-person training is really at the point where you're running. And right now we're doing tabletop drills, which I think is the walking. We've got past the crawling. And now we're kind of applying it in a conversation, looking at maps where people would go. But as far as active drills or anything like that, we haven't taken that next step. But it is a goal within the next year and a half to absolutely use our facility for something of that nature.
Okay, thanks.
I will note, Kristen, that, pardon me, from an active shooter standpoint, most of the staff has been through actually several active shooter situations. So I'm not sure directly what your question was to, but as far as scenarios that have happened recently around, in Boulder and in Atlanta, those are things that we've been addressing over the last actually 3 years, and ongoing training for the team, which again is why we're very appreciative that the board signed off on the capital projects we did a year and a half ago with the ability to lock down the facility. So again, all those things have really set us up for strong preparedness as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just want to, curious about if something like that did happen, everybody knows what to do. And
Yep, I think that the DHS, as Pat stated, we've been through and through that training quite well, and that's run, hide, or fight is basic what it comes down to on that. But we do have that pretty regularly as far as, like you were saying, the drills or in person, those are something we're going to continue to expand on as we get further into this.
great, thank you.
And then I'll just kind of finish off with logistics, just because I think it's such a key part of what we do. And as we're going to come out of this, I think it's going to be very key to bringing the staff back. And it's also going to be key to making sure that we continue to deliver the same service we always have and what the expectation from our client will be. We recognized our Q1 winners for 2021. One of those is sitting in the room today, and that's Dan Hill from AV. He continues to showcase his skills in the AV department and was recognized by his peers. Jared Burkhalter from Facilities, same thing, was recognized by his peers for his work ethic and his ability to help on projects and jump outside of his job description where needed. And then the one that I really want to highlight is somebody that over a year has actually been working. I played softball with him. I go bowling with him every now and then. He's on our custodial team, and it's Lewis Anderson. He had told me about a year ago that he's been looking at that board for a year and trying to get his name up there, and he did win this quarter. So it was an emotional kind of moment for him and for myself as well, because it's been a personal goal of ours. So Lewis finally made that board, so he's very proud of that, and I'm extremely proud to say that he's earned it. So the Logistics Committee is continuing planning an all-staff meeting for June 29th, and we're anticipating that kind of being a good time as we're looking at kind of a hiring blitz based on what we're starting to see from the CDH getting approval for. We're anticipating kind of April, May, maybe even sooner, but really by May, we're going to really be in the thick of the hiring part. And so this will give us a chance to kind of bring staff up to our culture, highlight things like the safety and what we can do for lockdowns, and get the entire staff together. There may have to be a hybrid component to that, and we're fully aware even in the current environment, but we think we're prepared to be able to host that kind of meeting and have an in-person either hybrid and bring all the staff back together in one form or another and have that kind of culture, training, get ready for, I think we're looking at a couple of themes that are kind of getting ready and getting back to events is kind of the theme, get everybody energized. So questions, free to answer any if you have any.
Any questions for Cody? Great, thank you.
I'm going to ask Cliff and Mary Michael to come up, but one thing I want to highlight as well, as far as logistics goes, one of the things that we are proud of here is the culture that we established, particularly before COVID. But what's really rewarding is when we have needed employees to come in and help us, like last week for St. Patrick's Day or the week before when we had events going every day. You know, the managers have called employees to see if they'd be willing to come in and and help out on relatively short notice. And what's rewarding is that not only do the employees answer their phones when they see us come up on caller ID, but they say yes. And we've been really, really fortunate in having those type of employees that they enjoy working here. They appreciate the opportunity to come back. They like seeing people that they work with. So we're very excited about that. We've had very good response from that part of the team. And again, I think it speaks highly to the culture that's been established over time. So with that, I'm going to let Cliff and Mary Michael take over.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Pat. And good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. As a marketing overview, I've got 5 things I'd like to highlight and just give you some reporting on. Many of you know we just finished hosting the Big Sky Basketball Championships for our first 3-year commitment. And many of you have heard and seen the press releases that talk about us, Boise, receiving the next 5 years of those championships. So Idaho Central Arena will be the home of the Big Sky from 2022 to 2026. So we're excited about that opportunity. We did provide some space for them this year in Boise Center to be able to provide COVID testing for all of the players and team management. During the tournament, they did 1,795 COVID tests with 0 positive results. So we were definitely thrilled with that. We'll take 0 any day. We did reach out and try to do a lot of promotions to them this year. Early on, we heard that they were not going to be able to eat at restaurants. And so we wanted to reach out to the teams and see if we could do some meals for them. Everything from buffets to box lunches to grab and go type meals. We did a series of e-blasts to each of the schools and got a very good response. I believe we heard from all 11 schools. In many cases, they wanted us to cater to the hotels, and a decision was made to not do that, just to make, not to compete with the hotels, but also our equipment and ability to do that. So we did plant a lot of seeds for future years to be able to showcase Boise Center, to use our space and to use our catering services. So we feel like that was Even though we didn't book a lot of business from that this year, we did plant a lot of seeds and get a lot of exposure. And so in the coming years, I anticipate that to continue to grow and to be profitable for Boise Center. As Cody mentioned, we did Butte and Boise, our St. Patrick's Day Festival. We did a curbside edition where we pre-sold meals, dinner for two. We sold 105 of those meals, and we had a lot of fun doing that. One of the unique things about that is we had a chance to promote our date. We did a save the date postcard in those meals for our 2022 event, which we certainly hope to have live and in person. So even if those people who purchased meals bought tickets for next year, we kind of think that we've already got hopefully 200 tickets in the bank, because we have a lot of fans who enjoyed what our catering team provided for that St. Patrick's Day meal. We also promoted booking holiday parties. Now that we're engaged in booking events, we really wanted to push the fact that companies and families or groups can book space here at the center for the holidays. And the way time flies, that'll be here soon. On the GBAC accreditation, we spent a lot of time in our last work session talking about all the things that we were going to be doing to promote the fact that we are GBAC certified. Those plans continue to roll forth. And one of the new initiatives we have is, as you can see behind Anne Marie, we have a lot of custom images. That's the Grove Plaza. Thank you for demonstrating, Anne Marie. We have several too that actually show the GBAC logo. And some of our staff have indicated that becomes a conversational piece. Well, what is that up there? What is that logo? What am I seeing? So it's an opportunity for us to promote the standards that we have here at the facility. And so we're getting great mileage out of that. So thanks to Mary Michael too for helping to build those slides and those visuals and helping us promote that success story. I'm working with Allie and the sales team. We're going to be collaborating here very shortly on creating some new trade show materials. This is something that we've budgeted for. We haven't used our materials, so we pulled them all out of the inventory and we took a look at them and realized that we do have to do some updating based on changes in hotel rooms, flights into the market. A lot of bullet points have changed. And so we're going to take some unique opportunities. We're meeting tomorrow with Ward Hooper just to have some dialogue with him to see if we might be able to use a local artist to create some imaging for trade show backdrops and banners. So we're investigating that and look forward to just to refresh all of the things we're taking to trade shows, everything from backdrops to pop-up banners to even tabletop displays. Something that we want to make sure that our team has current materials and that they're all consistent with the brochures and the website messaging that we have. We don't want to contradict anything. Our marketing plan is going forward on a national basis. We have ads that we're placing and also getting editorial with those. We have good exposure coming up in Smart Meetings magazine, small market meetings, meetings today, meetings, conventions, and we're also advertising for the first time in associations and conventions. So we're really trying to reach out on a national basis. We're doing a lot regionally and locally, and I'm going to let Mary Michael provide those updates in her dialogue, because that has a lot to do with our digital marketing. Right now, we're reaching out and doing as much as we can digitally and having some success there. So I'll turn the time over to her if there's no questions.
I have one question. You know, with the new nonstop flights, I'm wondering have you adjusted your plan at all to buy ads or to try to get some exposure in those other markets now that we have nonstop flights too?
We'll certainly be looking at that. And one of the things we're doing too is collaborating with Allie and the CVB to make sure that what is happening in those markets. Sometimes I think Allie's got a couple of sales missions planned or sales initiatives. And so we'll follow up with those and do some marketing just to make sure that we can get more exposure. The more exposure, the better.
I think, if I may, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, add to that. Last week, we had a meeting, the CVB Center and Digital Edge together, and learned some new data from Digital Edge about other destinations really going full guns nationally in their marketing. And the latest data and research is showing more confidence kind of shifting from the rebooking to maybe sourcing, and event planners in the past year have become organizers extremely savvy at digital searching and participating in virtual fam trips. So Carrie and myself spoke late last week, and we're going to connect email this week about turning on both Boise CVB's national campaign through Digital Edge, and then the center also turning ours on probably within the next, it takes, once we say yes and where we want to program that, it takes about a week for that to go live. So that's it's coming soon. So good, very good, timely question. So it's actually it's amazing to see the pace of things in the past, since the vaccine started in mid-January to where we are now. The pace has just gone uphill, which is great. Very positive. Knock wood, please.
Yeah, that's good.
Shall I continue? Okay. Okay. And I'm going to give you an update on communications and marketing efforts. And I'll start, just waiting. Oh, I controlled the slide, sorry. I was waiting. Guys are not gonna forward the slides for me. They're laughing at me. I don't work in this department every day, so. Okay, so what you're seeing in front of you is with Governor Little moving Idaho to stage 3 on February 2nd, this opened up the possibility for Boise Center to immediately begin booking events for up to 50 people. And this was a big shift from the previous size limit that was just 10 people. And we had been in that for, gosh, I want to say Thanksgiving time, mid-November, Thanksgiving time. We had, in the marketing department, already prepared to launch our local awareness campaign. The target audience or target market for this is people within the Treasure Valley. People that work for corporations, organizations, and businesses larger than 50 people is who we're targeting. Our key message to them is that Boise Center is open and we're booking dates and space for future meetings and events. And on the far right, you'll see an email that's more lengthy, and we have this we have this run 3 times over 10 weeks in the Idaho Business Review. We started this campaign in mid-February. It's running for 10 weeks. I can tell you the measurement that our KPIs that we're looking for are increased awareness, engagement, meaning we would like to see traffic to our website, and also lead form completions on the website. I'm glad to tell you that at 5 weeks, our website traffic has increased 67% from where it was 6 weeks prior. We verified that the source of this traffic is within the geographical area in this local and the next regional campaign that I'll show you. So this is the local campaign. Really, because our short-term business events that we'll book this year are our greatest opportunity for revenue this year, where we can recover some of those revenues earlier. It's important to really market to this local area to try to build reassurance, to try to build awareness, and let people know we're clean, we're safe. We have the GBAC Star certification. You'll see the logo, the medallion logo on all of our ads now. And then the next slide is our regional campaign, and the target audience for this is the Treasure Valley and cities within 350 miles. We know from research that cities within a 1-day drive or a short flight are likely to book future events or events in 2021 or 2022 at a faster pace versus a group that might have to travel across the country. Certainly any events that draw international events. Right now, Boise Center has a local campaign active, and then this regional campaign, which is our physical space and virtual options messaging. Both of the campaigns that I showed, the previous and this, are highly placed digitally. The local is placed on Idaho Business Review, Boise Dev, and several other local news stations. The regional campaign's biggest is Google Display, and we also turned on our search engine, our search campaign, which was one of the leading drivers to traffic to our website. On the far right, you'll see a sponsored post for LinkedIn, and this is a new opportunity that we're taking advantage of. I wrote a blog post last month talking about elevating virtual and hybrid events with Boise Center. And I partnered with our audiovisual team and we put together a neat new promotional video for our event studio. And we'll see that in just a few minutes here. So we're attacking our digital campaign with paid advertising on the new sites I mentioned, Google, search engine, sponsored media post, and organic media posts. Any questions before we show you the video? Questions from the board on the advertising? Thank you. The video will start here shortly. Thank you. I have one more slide to show here. They'll switch it back. And lastly, I wanted to share with the board, you may remember, but a quick refresher back to January when we learned, or when we did the media press outreach for our GBAC Star certificate accreditation. I'm just twisting my tongue today. Sorry about that. So media coverage that we generated on a national level. The news was picked up by Meetings and Conventions industry publication, who published on the far right. You'll see hotels and airports earn GBAC Star cleaning accreditation. This news placement and coverage included the image of Boise Center East, quote attributed to Pat Rice, and a link to our website. This same article was included in their daily news email distributed to over 5,000 people. USAE, which is the Association E-News, picked up and included the information in their weekly email. An article I submitted to the International Association of Venue Managers picked up the article for their news blog. Coverage was included with an image, quote, and article. And then locally, the Boise Dev covered the story and included an image and quote attributed to me. And that is the end of my report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Mary Michael and
You're
Cliff.
welcome.
Any questions? All right, thank you
Thank you very much.
Our IT and AV guys continue to amaze me with their ability to put together those kind of videos and press releases. So amazing team. Allie? The delay was because we were sanitizing the microphones.
Clean space over here right now. Madam Chair, members of the board, thanks for the time this afternoon. Today, I'm going to be sharing just kind of where we're at year to date and what we're seeing moving ahead as we go through 2021 and into 2022. Focusing on three kind of main topics. The first, looking at our outreach and contract activity so far, some of what the sales and event teams have been up to. Second, I'll share an update on our meetings marketing campaign. This is what we've partnered with the CVB and Digital Edge on. And finally, looking at the looming recovery. Sounds kind of ominous, but it's all good stuff. So diving in, looking at our sales updates. This year, we've gotten off to a really busy start. One thing in particular, looking at our industry partner collaboration. And so working with our counterparts at International Association of Venue Management. I've been quite involved with this organization since 2019 on their convention center committee, and it's really afforded Boise Center some cool opportunities. One of them being leading some roundtable discussions, monthly roundtable discussions with colleagues from across the country. Allows us to keep a pulse on, recovery across the board, what other facilities are doing, ranging from, really sales specific topics to more operational, the operational realm, talking about becoming a vaccination site or other sort of alternative use facility. In addition, you'll see an article in the May-June issue of their Venue Professional magazine. I've discovered quickly that I'm not an author, but was given the opportunity to write a column for the convention center portion of the magazine. And it really is just going to outline a look back, sort of a reflection over the last year where we've come as an industry, and in particular from the perspective of sales teams. A couple other things. I have MPI Cascadia on here. This was a really neat event that the sales team participated in last week. It was keynoted by Michael Dominguez, who's the president and CEO of Alhai. This is Associated Luxury Hotels International. He gave some really great insight as far as how the industry is progressing and painted a really positive picture, which I'll dive into a little bit more in some of my following slides. But this was another great opportunity. I joined a panel following Michael Dominguez's presentation, and it was a panel of Pacific Northwest venues, mostly made up of the sales teams, but it allowed us some time to share with meeting planners what we're doing as buildings to prepare for the return of their events. So that was a great opportunity. Finally, the CVB came to us with an invitation to host Boise Meeting Pros. They're having a roundtable event in April. And so we, of course, jumped at the opportunity. We'll have, we're anticipating about 20 local meeting planners in our building, and we'll also be able to do site tours. This has been touched on earlier today, but the new nonstop flights is, of course, great news for Boise and for Boise Center. Really opens up the market for us. Once all these new flights start up, we're going to have 25 nonstop destinations added to the list. So that's excellent. Prospecting and outreach. The sales and events team had the opportunity to visit with our local key accounts. We did a client appreciation initiative in February where we reached out to about 60 of our local clients, had some FaceTime with them, just kind of regrouped on where they are at with their meetings, and also just really to maintain relationships. In addition, of course, we keep in close contact with our lost and prospective clients. We're forging ahead with our sales missions and FAMs. In fact, we're doing something new this year. In April, we're going to be hosting 2 virtual FAMs. This is something that the sales team has worked on with the CVB, along with Digital Edge. It's really been kind of a group effort to get this off the ground. But our internal AV team here is going to be hosting it on a Zoom platform for us. It will air twice in April, and we've done some pre-recorded shots across the city and at Boise Center. And we're hoping to reach a couple hundred planners at each showing. A couple of the virtual FAMs that Digital Edge has hosted in the past have produced some really great results. So we'll be sure to share the links to those broadcasts to you. And finally, I really wanted to share, we had a great success story in February with the event team and the local contracts. February of 2021 brought in 24 local event contracts, which is a high since the same month year prior. Only 2 of those 24 represented COVID rebookings. And so that's a really great indicator that these RFPs that are coming in, the inquiries coming in, are converting. And it's showing, I mean, you'll see this Q3, Q4 compression. All these new events coming online are fighting for dates and space from the COVID cancellations that we booked into the second half of this year and into 2022. So lots of good news coming down the pike. So sharing some updates on Digital Edge and the meetings recovery campaign that we're working on with the CVB. Over the last month, we developed some new content and new creative, basically transitioning from a message of recovery to more of what's the next chapter, you know, kind of getting used to the new normal with meetings. And you'll see this picture here, the year over it, we're on it, was sort of a mock-up of one of the digital banner ads that we'll be running. This shift is really delivering more specific information to the audience as far as building size, you know, the GBAC accreditation, success stories. You know, we do know that planners are spending more time on research and sourcing right now and less time on cancellation. So we want to make sure that they're getting the relevant information that they need from us. Continuing to target the local and regional audiences in our digital ads. Our email campaign is reaching nationally. We are renting lists from organizations like Smart Meetings, NPI, and of course our database reaches nationally as well. So we do plan to continue the campaign through the end of 2021, especially now that we are seeing the activity that we want from planners as far as sourcing and RFP distribution. Right now, it would be essential for us to remain present in the market. And so we're just continuing our work with Digital Edge and the CVB on that. Finally, the CVB does have the coinciding leisure campaign. They have transitioned from working with Ryzen to their new creative agency, Duft Watterson. You may have seen some of these leisure ads on outlets like Boise Dev or on different social media outlets. The concept for the leisure campaign is Base Camp Boise, basically kind of a hub and spoke idea, Boise being the hub and exploring the surrounding areas, the Treasure Valley as the spokes. They've also sort of segmented the year into halves, Q1, Q2 being more focused on staycations and outdoor activities, Q3, Q4 transitioning to more of the group activities, be it concerts or sporting events, that sort of thing. So looking ahead, lots of numbers on this slide, and I'll just kind of break it down here. Q1, Q2, and this is comparing our 2021 tentative and definite events compared to our 2019 definite events. And we're looking at our room nights and our economic impact. So Q1, Q2 of 2021 is obviously falling far behind where we were in 2019. I mean, the numbers kind of speak for themselves here. Looking at Q3, which is early summer, through the end of summer, we do see some improvements moving in the right direction, just at 18% differentiation as far as room nights and 11% differentiation as far as economic impact. Q4 is where the real success story is, and this is exciting news here. In terms of room nights and economic impact, we expect to exceed where we were in 2019. As these dates near, it's possible that we'll see some slippage in those numbers. But again, and I think I've said this at our last work session, it's a really phenomenal starting point. And a lot of this activity is due to the great work that the event and sales teams did as far as, rebooking and capturing those events that had previously canceled due to COVID. The vaccines and easing restrictions, we see an almost direct correlation as far as RFPs coming in, as those two facets, continue to improve and progress. Like I said, strong Q4. October alone is estimating over 3 times the number of room nights that we saw in October of 2019. And as we look into 22, off to a great start there. You'll see the percentages where we are compared to 2019, looking at 77% tentative and definite room nights in FY22 compared to FY 2019, and about the same amount, 72%, in terms of economic impact in 2022 compared to 2019. And this is, of course, a year that we're still booking. Most of our events book within 12 months, and so we still have plenty of time to fill in 2022. So we just expect those numbers to continue to improve there. I'm going to point to the convention summary stats, but before I do that, I wanted to open up any questions before looking at our summary stats.
Any questions for Ally?
Madam Chair, Ally, are we still running with 4 sales managers?
We have 3 sales managers and then myself, so 4 total on the team.
And it's Kay, Linda, Lori, that same?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So the convention summary stats, and if you're here in person, you have a hard copy in front of you. And then for those of you tuning in, I believe it was emailed to you. This is something that, this report, these metrics had sort of been paused since COVID hit. Running the numbers during COVID, we just weren't really coming up with insightful data. So what we're seeing here, and this is sort of breaking it down, like why are we losing business and who's giving us RFPs. I'm not going to dwell on a lot of it, but there were a couple things I did want to point out. Corporate and association business still our strongest 2 types of organizations that provide us RFPs. As far as market segment, who's providing the most RFPs, sports and entertainment is a newcomer to the list. We've seen, I can't tell you how many, number of dance inquiries, dance and cheer type inquiries come in, which has been nice, especially now that we have an opportunity to host that type of event when we're not as busy. Now, when we get back to our more, standard type of event, these don't tend to mesh well, with a business event. But right now, it's been a great opportunity for Boise Center to take on some of these sporting type events through the summer. As far as who's booking the most business, you see it ranges from medical to the food production industry to transportation and environmental. I find this interesting. These are the types of industries that have remained active really since COVID hit, just out of necessity. And so I think there's a higher comfort level there to return to meetings sooner than maybe some other different market segments. So with that, I'm happy to open it up to any questions.
Ally, on this, the market segments, do you think this is different than during non-COVID times? Do you think this has changed and skewed?
It's fluctuated slightly. When I compared it to this last report, we saw a slight shift. Education fell from number 1 to number 2, but nothing too material there. Food production is new to the list. We've had some nice opportunities come through, whether it's through Thomas Cuisine or Shamrock Foods. So, there are definitely markets that we're pursuing along with the CVB. That was another thing that we touched on in our last meeting with the CVB and Digital Edge is, what regions are producing for us. California and Pacific Northwest are strong. and specifically what market segments.
So can you describe a little, who is under like the education/libraries? What type of organizations are those? Is that associations?
It is a lot of associations and there's a number of repeat events that we host: Idaho Association of School Administrators, Idaho Education Agency. A number of those would be represented under the education market segment.
Okay. And it looks like there is more corporate RFPs, but there's less conversion.
Yes, corporate is still, they're slower to return as far as in-person meetings go. One of the main things being, and I'm sure you understand this, the association business really has to have their meetings. I mean, they count on it for funds to host meetings through registrations and sponsorships and exhibitors. Whereas corporate, they can almost accomplish what they would normally do at an in-person meeting over Zoom or some other virtual platform.
Okay. And that's where I was kind of wondering if this was, that was due to the fact of COVID, or, does that look different in non-COVID times?
I think it does. Some of what we're hearing, and again, through some of these webinars that we've participated in, or some of these industry discussions, is corporate will come back. It's going to be a little bit slower, but when it does come back, there's some predictions that it's going to really thrive, just because they have missed out on those team building opportunities, retreats, that sort of thing. So we do feel like it's going to come back strong. It just might be a little bit slower than the association sector.
And then under why lost business, the choose another city, do you capture the city that they end up going to?
We do, yes. For the most part, if they tell us, then certainly we'll capture that. On our next report, I'd be happy to include those cities on here, and I can certainly email you what we're seeing as far as most recent competition.
Yeah, no, it's always good to know if there's somebody who's consistently winning business over us, it's always good to see what they're doing.
Right. Any other questions?
I assume the Washington, D.C. RFP is from associations.
Yeah, that Mid-Atlantic region is really heavy in the National Association sector. I will say, and this is really exciting news, the CVB is going to be filling one of their sales manager positions. And their plan is to have a remote person in the DC area, which I think is just phenomenal, to have someone on the ground representing Boise and Boise Center in the Washington, DC area. So we're hoping that's going to coincide with the sales mission opportunity. Initially, we were targeting Atlanta, again, because of the new nonstop flight. Andrew and I were looking at, just our database and where we have maybe more of a more potential clients really in the destination. Atlanta is a market we need to grow, but DC does have a lot of potential. So we're potentially leaning towards DC for a fall sales mission.
Great. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Allie? Well, hopefully all good news for especially Q3, Q4.
Yes, I think so. Lots to celebrate there. Thank you for the time.
Great, thank you.
Kristen, there's a couple of other things about the corporate market. A lot of the big corporations that we deal with here actually have sister facilities or branches or whatever. A lot of attendees will come from Washington, Oregon, California, surrounding states that currently have stricter restrictions than Idaho does. Whereas the association, a lot of those associations, particularly the education type associations, are state associations, Idaho. And so we all live in the same world pretty much as far as restrictions or lack thereof. And again, without a lot of those people can drive and not have to worry about flying. A lot of the corporations we're finding are having some concerns about just when their people will be able to travel either, from, again, these other areas and surrounding states. And timing is so inconsistent, as are some of the restrictions. So we're trying to work through some of those challenges as we move forward as well. So.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm showing about 5 to 2 if you want to take a 5-minute break. And
Yep, let's do that. Do we need to have a official adjournment of the work session?
Sure.
Okay. Entertain a motion to adjourn the work session.
Move it.
Second,
Second.
thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break, 4-minute break, and see you all back here at 2. Controlling music. There we go. Okay.
Hello, Pat.
hey, hi, how are you?
Good.
You're looking great.
Thanks.
Can't wait to have you back on site.
Next month, maybe. We'll see how it goes.
Well, just take care of you. Tell Joan hello for me.
Oh, I will.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Can we do roll call
Ms. Mucko,
here?
Mr. Walker, Mr. Clock,
Here.
Mr. Oliver,
Here.
Here.
Great, thank you. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda?
Here.
All right, hearing none, we'll move forward. Chairwoman's remarks. Jim is actually traveling internationally and is not able to make it. And kind of along those lines, in order to provide some additional coverage, because Jim is traveling quite a bit, I'd like to appoint Jody as an alternate to the Finance Committee. And kind of along those lines, I'm going to let Jody give an update regarding the audit and where we are with that process.
Honored to be asked, proud to serve, Madam Chairman, but I don't recall being asked.
It's your pleasure to serve, though.
Well, the audit committee's had an active year, as you might imagine. We've been moving ahead with an audit scheduled for a month or 2 earlier release. However, there has been nothing substantial slowing us down, but there have been COVID related. Both Anne Marie and our auditor, primary auditor, Rachel Pullingham, have had or have COVID-19. So you won't be seeing an audit report this month, but we will next month. And there are no variances.
Great.
That-
Thank you, Jody.
Good by you, Anne Marie.
I see a head shake. And I think that our deadline that we're required to submit that audit by is what, May, sometime in May?
The deadline is May 30th, Madam Chair.
Okay, so we'll be fine. We're not in issue with it, any of that.
Yeah, we have been working for an earlier release simply because we all believe that the sooner the report is issued after the year end, the more useful it is.
Yeah,
We'll continue to work on that in future years.
great. Thank you, Jody. All right, with that, move on to approval of the regular minutes from February 18th. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, regular minutes are approved. On to the monthly and financial report, Pat and Anne Marie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. As was discussed as part of the work session, we had a great St. Patrick's Day dinner pickup, and we call it Butte in Boise because of the party we started back in 2019. There's a lot of Montana folks in the Valley, and as such, they really know what St. Patrick's Day is like in Butte. Pardon me. It's second only to Chicago, I think, although I've been told Boston has a pretty good one too. But there's two key things about Butte. Not only its Irish heritage, but also the food products that are served there. Pasties, which is a Cornish meat pie, and pork chop sandwiches. And so for the takeout dinner this year, we decided if we couldn't do a Butte and Boise party and live, then we'd feature some of the foods that people like and look forward to. So we used that database, and Mary Michael did a great job on social media, and we reached out, and it was a dozen cocktail pasties, and this was all pre-prepared, ready to go, ready to serve. Corned beef and cabbage, potatoes, carrots, what we call Blarney Stones, it's cake that's rolled in icing with peanuts. And then we also included some St. Patrick's Day swag, hats and paraphernalia, beads, that sort of thing, and made a really fun package out of it. And as you heard earlier, we sold 105 orders, which was for two. So we basically served 210 people that night, which, that's a small banquet for us. So I had the opportunity to greet each person as they came up and pick them up. We had scheduled delivery times or pickup times. And without exception, the one thing I heard was how great everybody thought the idea was. But the only disappointment was that we weren't having pork chop sandwiches. Unless you serve those fresh, they just aren't as good. So we chose not to do it. But as you heard earlier, we have great pre-sale for 2022. We've already established the date of March 11th. And that's also the Friday of Big Sky Tournament. And, hopefully both Montana teams will still be in the hunt because all those fans know about the party, and they made a great showing in 2019. So anyway, we had 660 people reserved a year ago on March 13th when we had to cancel it because of COVID. So we've got a good draw out there. So looking forward to that. As you also heard, Big Sky is here for the next 5 years. And I think that's attributed to a lot of hard work. CVB, a lot of, the chamber, us, a lot of the local facilities did a great job in working with them. You also heard that we provided space for the testing, and Dan Satter, who's the deputy commissioner with Big Sky, was very appreciative. I heard from the commissioner as well that without our space, they probably couldn't have pulled it off. So it's nice to know that we were a vital part this year in being able to produce a tournament. So again, just highlighting our GBAC accreditation. As was mentioned earlier, Central District Health is really proud of what we've done and recognizes us for our efforts. As you also heard, some of this is redundant. Local inquiries really have picked up. The renovations on 110, 120. The election date is May 18th. We're not sure if we're going to have an election at this point, barring a write-in candidate. So there was only one candidate that filed, which means that, and it's to fill Peter's position that Peter is retiring from. And so barring a write-in candidate, we probably won't have to actually have the actual election. We would just have to wait for the certification of the election at the end of May by the county commissioners. Facility tour was provided to representatives of the East Montgomery County Improvement District out of New Caney, Texas. That went really, really well. They were very impressed with the facility. We were one of about 20 facilities they've traveled around to. They hope to start construction later this year and have theirs completed within about 2 years. So they've done a lot of due diligence. I'd really like to go down and see it when it opens to see what they were able to incorporate from what they've learned across the country. Again, you heard earlier about some of the events that we've been able to start hosting again. This is the Dairy West convention that was held just earlier this month. So you can see the appropriate seating. And as I mentioned before, when we've called, the team has actually responded. They answer their phones. They say yes. We're excited to have them back. It's great to see these folks back in action. And again, just examples of the room sets. You've heard us talk about the hybrid events and how our virtual studio is performing exceptionally well. I'm not going to go through all of these. You have them in your report, but again, just examples of how flexible the team has been and the fact that our AV and IT teams are generating revenue for the facility. Even when we were only able to do 10 people, they were able to provide service to much larger groups that were doing virtual. Visitor center stats, we're getting more visitors. I think some of this is attributable to certainly some of the nicer weather.
Pardon me, sorry, Madam Chair, Pat, I should have asked earlier, on this election day, May 18th,
Yes, sir.
do we know of any other things being on the ballot?
I believe still this year, I think schools can still, I think this is the last year. I'd have to double check that one. But some of the like cemetery districts and sewer districts, and there are other, I guess, called sub-districts of the state that also have that same election date.
And that's being changed?
I'm going to have to ask John Sheldon or Mike about some of the other change. I think schools have been affected, I think, but I'm not sure. Most of the other districts are still the same.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So as you can see that, California, Oregon, Washington are still providing a lot of visitors here. According to the visitor center, a lot of them are looking at relocation information as well as just local. Although last week when we were doing the St. Patrick's Day pickup, it was a beautiful day and there were a lot of people out walking around. And there were some folks from Texas. There were two different groups, ironically, that were walking by families. And they were from the Dallas area. And one was Dallas, the other was actually Austin. But they were here skiing Sun Valley, and they came back to Boise to spend a couple of days. So again, a lot of visitors right now still. As far as the goal, we still call them goals for the year, but the fiscal management, we did transfer $500,000 to the center for the month, $350,000 so far for March. The control expenses from the P&L side, again, we still try to operate as tight as we can. Some of the CapEx projects, as you've heard, 110, 120s, those are planned, and we're trying to get ahead of when groups actually, when we start seeing the higher influx of groups after May. So I think the timing is great. From our cash position, cash remains extremely strong. The room tax revenues continue to exceed our forecast, knock on wood. Rates remain challenged, but occupancies remain pretty strong, not as strong as last year. But again, our first quarter, December, January, February last year, were record months. So I think given the circumstances, I think the hotels are performing really well right now. The ADR is hidden a little bit in there, but again, the start of the year, we're showing increases. So the line's going the right direction. We were 16,000 room nights down to prior year, which sounds like a lot, but again, given the circumstances, I think it's pretty good. And we're 10% as a percentage, we're 10 points behind prior year, but still looking strong. So, the ADR is actually increasing a little bit. So again, we're moving in the right direction and still ahead of forecast. Same message here on demand and revenues. Demand continues to increase. It'll be interesting to see, particularly over the next couple of weeks, being spring break for us as far as our neighboring states as well. I know that the CVB is putting a big push on leisure travel, as you heard from Allie earlier. So as long as the other states stay more restricted, we're a great haven for visitors. So again, going in the right direction. some of this is redundancy. So from the sales side, so I'll probably go through this fairly quick since both Ally and Cliff touched on a lot of this. The pickup on conventions and other meetings is looking positive. Ally touched on that. Same thing with confirmed conventions. Unless there's any real questions about what I've just covered, I'll turn it over to Anne Marie.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. You can see here in the circle, we're 590,000 positive variance over budget, which is good news. Like Pat had said, when we get to the next slide, please. You can see here, we are, the tax revenues have stabilized, meaning that it's not declining anymore. We're almost $200,000 over budget. So that bodes well for us. We're maintaining our SG&A expenses. So overall, the tax revenue side is trending in a positive direction. And I think as we go through these slides, you'll notice that we're starting to have some positive news finally. So that's a good thing. Next slide, please. Regarding the Boise Center, as indicated earlier, our AV operations continues to generate 46% of our operating revenue. Overall, month to date, our revenue was up 17,000. Our net loss was less than budget by 28. Year to date, our EBITDA loss is 1.4 million, which is less than budget by 0.3 million. So again, despite the fact that revenues aren't as high as we had anticipated, we're managing the costs to that revenue stream. Next. This shows the square foot utilization, and as Ally had indicated earlier, you can see the compression that's occurring in that fourth quarter, September, October, November. That's the gray bars, and you can see they're starting at this point, they're September and October are up in that blue range, which is our optimal target range. And you'll notice that May, June, and July and August are showing increasing utilization over the prior first quarter. Next slide, please. Here's our operating revenue trend. When you look at our operating revenue for the Boise Center, we had forecasted that revenues would increase quicker than they have actually had. At the time we did the budget, we didn't project that the continued restrictions would be in place, and so our revenues are behind budget, but we're still managing the expenses to manage the losses. You'll see here over on the side, we have a budget of 4.4 million. Our forecast right now is 3.2. This would indicate year to date at this point that we're 1.2 million under budget for the whole year. That's not for the first quarter. That's a forecast through the end of the year. Next, Pat. So, we just wanted to go over a little bit, what we see is our road to recovery, which is the distribution of the vaccine is a critical milestone. And the biggest thing for that is that it gives the travelers a perception of a sense of safety. I went out, I don't know about the rest of you, but I did go out to dinner on Saturday and it was absolutely crazy. Some of the restaurants that you normally could just walk into were standing room only. And I thought that was an indication that people are starting to maybe feel so safer and starting to get out and move around.
Can I ask, Madam Chair,
Mhm.
I want to ask Mary a question about the restaurant that she went to. Were the people wearing masks? Or are they still unmasked?
They were unmasked.
Where was it?
I was in Jim County,
Oh,
but it still, I noticed it was last week, I think I went, and people take their mask off to eat and they don't ever put them back on.
right. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Madam Chair.
And somebody was telling me, and I can't remember where it was, that they actually went into the restaurant and the servers weren't even masked. So there is starting to be some relaxation, or people are starting to be more relaxed, I guess would be a better way to say it. There's also 2 more hotels in Boise that received their GBAC accreditation in the last couple of months, which I think bodes well, because so people can come to our center, know we're GBAC certified. Well, now they can come and stay at places that they know are GBAC certified. So it all just increases that perception of safety. There's is certainly pent-up demand for leisure. Some research that I did today indicated that they believe that those people that do want to go on vacation have actually got more dollars saved up to go on vacation, and will spend more dollars when they are on vacation. So that's always a good news. We also see, the local events, increased local business due to the lifting of the restrictions. The City of Boise turned the event approval over to Central District Health, and we've seen some positive results from the approval of Central District Health. Cody referred, to the Wine, Women, and Shoes, and that's a perfect example. Regarding business travel, we've got regional snapbacks in 2021. I think the business travel is going to be a long multi-year recovery ahead. You've got different industries that are in different stages, so they're going to affect differently. So you've got your early rebounders, and then you have your market followers, and then you have your long-term disrupted, which are, so this is probably from a marketing perspective, how some of our events and stuff will rebound back. Next, please. The next thing I wanted to go over here, and Mike Stoddard, please feel free to jump in at any point if you have clarification. I went to an IAVM, or not went to, Zoomed to an IAVM meeting on Tuesday. The Washington State Convention Center was one of the participants, and they had talked about they had successfully applied for a PPP loan. And they went through the process that they went through to get it. And when they did the change in the legislation back in January, they approved destination marketing organizations. And as you look at the, originally when we looked at the definition, we didn't believe that we fit under it, but it does talk about the 3rd bullet point on here, engaged in and derives the majority of its operating budget of the entity from revenues attributable to providing live events. The other thing that they had added was they added this quasi-government or political subdivision of a state or local government. So in the past, the PPP loans were not available to government entities. This revision allowed us to apply. So I went on Wednesday, we reached out to 3 different banks. I got a response from US Bank. We did submit an application to US Bank for the PPP loans. Now, the devil's in the details. Next, please, Pat. One of the things that we have to certify is that the money is necessary. As I did some research, these are some of the conditions that determine whether it's necessary or not. And Mike Stoddard was going to do some additional research to make sure that we met that necessary definition. But one of them was that you had to have economic uncertainty in the hospitality industry certainly fits that. The purpose of the PPP loan was to keep employees on payroll, especially in the event COVID cycles back. So the forgiveness, there's a forgiveness piece to it, and I'll go over some of the details of that. But one of the other issues is we can't obtain credit elsewhere. We don't have access to the markets to be able to obtain credit or to a bank normally other than through this PPP loan. There are some actions that we have taken to conserve our losses. One of them was we eliminated the ceiling project. So we did cut back on our capital improvements. It says the business must need the funds, and right now we're currently drawing about $125,000 a month in reserves. As tax revenues increase, that should taper off. But one of the other things that said to consider was what happens when you have key employees that are subject to COVID, and how do you continue operations during that period, which applies to us. Then business interruption insurance, not covering pandemic related scenarios. We had we have business interruption insurance, but it would not cover the losses that we've suffered due to COVID. We're in a recession. And then it stated that accumulation of capital need not be necessary immediately, but used within a reasonable time, must be specific, definite, and feasible. And in my mind, we have the pool project that has been presented to us, and then we also have the ceiling project, which are specific, definite, and feasible projects that would make this necessary. And then we can use the funds to cover cash flow needs during a ramp up. So as we always enter a rapid growth period or a faster growth period, you always need cash. And so that would be another reason that would make this loan necessary. Next slide, please. Okay. So some of the technicalities behind it is you can apply for up to 2.5 times monthly payroll. That for us was about $1 million. The 60-40 rule says 60% has to go to payroll, 40%, no more than 40% to operations. You have an SBA loan, the payment would be about $227,000 annually. So that would pass on the compliance, the bond compliance issue. The rate is 1%. The forgiveness is proportional, which means if we have, at the time of application, we had 52 employees. If we have 52 employees at the time we are done with disbursement, which is 24 weeks, we would have 100% forgiveness. If it dropped down, let's say to 50 people, you'd have let's say it's a 97% forgiveness. Obviously, you can't forgive more than 100%. The one thing that Mike is researching is this term of 5 years, since we can't have term debt. And I reached out to SBA, and under like their 7A program, they can shorten the length of the note as long as they stay within the authorization. But SBA said that this PPP loan is defined by statute, so you can't do a note less than 5 years. So Mike Stoddard was doing some research to see if there was a way that we could make that fit within our budget. Did you want to provide any kind of an update, Mike, on that, or anything I've covered so far?
Madam Chair, Anne-Marie, again, we're taking a look at a few things. I think I would also say that we're frankly still a little puzzled by how the Washington Convention Center, which is apparently a government entity, fit within the PPP program. That there must be some other definitions around there somewhere, but in general, they did not allow it to be available to government entities, and it's not apparent to us where they tweaked that to provide that it's now eligible for entities that are governmental entities. So we're still a little puzzled about that as well, but it's a good sign that someone else did it. So we're checking that, and as Anne-Marie mentioned, obviously we've got some other technical issues on an Idaho basis in terms of constitutional provisions regarding debt. So we'll need to work that through as well. And then Anne-Marie highlighted the issues with the PPP loan generally and the need for necessity, et cetera. So there are a few things to track through as we work through it.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, that would just be my question, is the legality of it, with the debt, because essentially, I mean, it's not a grant, when you apply for it, it's a loan until it's forgiven. So, just kind of working through all those details to see if we can even do it. Yeah.
That's why I got Mike involved. I would have gotten him involved earlier, but like I said, I found out about it on Tuesday, and the application had to be submitted by 5 o'clock on Wednesday. So I went ahead and submitted. I thought we can always, Pat and I visited about it. We said we can always withdraw the loan application, but we can't submit it if we've missed the deadline.
Yeah, that was what I was wondering. I'm assuming that, depending on what you guys find out, we can always pull it, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So here I just laid out a timeline of where, if this was possible, we might have funding by the end of March. We have 24 weeks to use the money, so then you have to have a forgiveness application. So the goal would be to get that forgiveness application in ASAP. They have 60 days by law to approve or deny. So that means by 11/16, we would have an approval of the forgiveness or not. And if not, then we would repay the debt immediately. But the idea really is to make sure that we qualify and that we can get the forgiveness so that it would be paid by the end of the year.
Madam Chair, Anne Marie, what did you say the percentage was on repaying the loan?
When we filed the application, we had 52 FTE. Well, and it's really not FTE. We had 52 full-time or 52 people on payroll. So if we keep 52 people on payroll, that's 52 by 52 is 100%. So we had no decline in payroll. So we would have 100% forgiveness. If our payroll shrank, it would be proportional.
Gotcha.
So let's say you
Thank
had
you.
40, let's say you had 50 people and you only had 40, then you would get an 80% forgiveness, not the full 100%.
Gotcha. Thanks.
But we are starting to pick up and we're adding people to our payroll as we are moving forward. And you heard Cody talk about the operations supervisor. We are looking at adding an HR specialist for recruiting. We're also looking at adding a couple of part-time AV people. So all indications are that we don't anticipate having a reduction in FTE by the deadline, by the end of the disbursement period. I also had looked at the PPP2 loan, and because it is more favorable to entities that have an NAICS code for 72, which is food service, but we cannot be in both loans at the same time. So it's highly likely we won't be able to get into the PPP loan 2. Next. And that is the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Does anybody have any questions for Anne Marie?
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Pat, anything else?
No, Madam Chair, members of the board, I think we can go ahead and move, actually, if you can approve the report, and then Ryan and his group are here and prepared to address the board.
Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the monthly activity and financial report.
So moved.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, monthly report is approved. On to other business. Pat, did you want to introduce?
Sure. As we've been discussing over the past few months, or had ongoing conversations with Idaho Competitive Aquatics, and Ryan Stratton has taken the lead for the group. We thought that it was a good time to have a Q&A session with the board regarding some of the highlights and some of the things that have come up over the last month. So invited them today, and there are 4 here ready and willing and able to chat with the board about any questions you might have.
Great, thank you. And then once you guys get situated, Ryan, I'll have you introduce your team or.
Sure. Madam Chairwoman and board, thanks again for having us here. We appreciate the opportunity. I've brought, you guys have met Jeff Irwin and Melanie Rabaki, who are part of our team and have been as part of our investor capital group. And then I've also brought to the right of me here is Nick Gaggiano. We hired Nick to come on board and do a number of things for us, but essentially he's kind of acting as what will be our program coordinator and starting to develop some of the things that we'll do once we're able to have that facility open. And he's going to help us along the way as we get everything put together. So he's had an opportunity to meet some of the people here in the room and meet a lot of people in the community. And this is, I guess, his second stint here in Boise, both times involved with sport of swimming. So as Pat mentioned, we're back to talk some more about pools. We certainly appreciate the opportunity again and the time with all of you guys. We have a couple items, I guess, that we wanted to kind of go through, and one is, specific about property, as we kind of talked with you guys last month about searching for an appropriate parcel for this and some of the options that were out there. And then obviously kind of going through any questions you might have. And we put together some slides about some various issues that you guys had brought forth during the last meeting over the course of the last month. And we can review some of that data. And of course, we're open to questions at any time as we go through any of this information. So, the first thing is really land. And as we mentioned last month, it's been somewhat of a struggle to find an appropriate piece of land where we can put this parcel. As you all know, Boise seems to be kind of exploding in interest from various people moving to the area. Land has certainly become a little bit more sparse and a little bit more expensive. And we've definitely struggled in finding an appropriate place. We've obviously looking for parcels to purchase. We've met with city governments. We've met with county governments. We've met with schools. We've really tried to go down every possible road to find a potential home for this facility. One of the parcels that we had brought to you last month, and last month was actually under contract, was a parcel that sits on Finley Avenue, which is Federal Way in Finley, up off the Broadway interchange. And it's 3.73 acres. Its list price was 1.462 million. And we've kind of been going through the motion of dealing, kind of negotiating, so to speak, with the prospect of being able to put in a purchase offer for this property. Right now, what's been presented to us by our brokers, which is TOK, is to offer 1.55 million for that piece of property. That's 6% above ask. There are multiple parties bidding for the property right now. The terms are relatively straightforward, but they're asking for minimal due diligence period. So it's kind of outlined as a 60-day due diligence period with an option to extend that another 30 days. And then a $50,000 earnest money deposit, which of course is entirely refundable anytime within that due diligence period if something's discovered to be not workable for our facility. It's certainly been an interesting process as we've gone through this kind of call it negotiation or discussions with the seller and through our agents. And I know that they have reached out to Peter and had a few discussions. I don't know if he has any specific comment about the property or the value that we're trying to target there. But we feel like it's fair given where the market's at and the availability of land.
I guess I could just add, we talked about this at the last meeting, as far as location, I think it's a very good location as far as centrality and proximity to the freeway, as well as the support services around it. One concern that we did talk about was the ability to expand there, which Ryan had mentioned that, long-term vision, perhaps replicating, smaller facilities further out west, et cetera. But aside from that, your experience so far is very indicative of our market. Finding the site is one thing, and then being able to get it under contract is another. It's hard to even use the word negotiate right now in our market. So yeah, that's not unusual, but overall, physically and high level, just my opinion is that it's a decent location for what you're looking to do and would serve for that purpose.
I do have a couple other slides, and so again, I think I shared this one last month that shows the property right there on Finley Avenue, adjacent to the Home Depot, Fred Meyer, which has obviously some neighboring businesses that would stand to benefit from a facility coming in. Lots of available parking if we can work with our what would be our new neighbors. Again, this kind of is more from the listing that talks about the size and the acreage and whatnot. We did have our architect put an overlay in so you can kind of see how this property might fit. This is currently drawn with essentially the absolute minimum amount of on-site parking that's available. My guess is we would probably try to get a few more on-site parking spots. But one of the objectives, of course, during any of our due diligence period would be to reach out to every single neighbor in the area, other businesses, and make sure they have a comfort level with traffic to the area and use of their facilities and parking areas and things like that as major events may require. But as you can see from the depiction, I mean, we've got quite a bit of extra property back behind it. This picture shows the pool essentially kind of as far forward as we can get it with the parking requirement. But behind that pool where there's additional space is equal to or more land than the actual pool is sitting on now. So it does present a pretty good opportunity for us to have some available space for future expansion or additional pools as we go forward. And we'll, I think at the end of as we go through some of these questions and the answers, we'll circle back to this property and ask for how we may be able to go forward with this. So some of the items that we had kind of talked about going forward or at the last meeting and in the last month is whether or not, this facility can kind of fit in line with some of the other facilities in the area. And can we really compete for some of these meets? Do we have the ability to bring people on site? Those sorts of things. And one of the big issues that's been expressed to us, of course, and one of our own concerns, quite honestly, is whether or not we're allowing enough space to have adequate seating in order to have a large meet. So what we've done is research kind of the required space, what that space that creates in terms of occupancy and seating, and a very basic, whether it be temporary or permanent nature, bleacher setup that provides simply 7 rows of bleachers with appropriate ADA spacing would create over 1,000 seats if you only did that on one side of the facility, which leaves, of course, plenty of deck all the way around the pool still. So the answer is yes, we believe that there's plenty of space for how we've drawn this out to put appropriate seating in, which would be able to accommodate not only spectators, but competitors alike. And it's really important to stress that very rarely do you have a situation of meet where all of the competitors and all of the spectators are all in the venue at the same time. Many meets are designed intentionally to ensure that no one has to be on site at a pool for 25 hours, in a 24-hour day. And so USA Swimming actually has a rule that tries to limit the length of any given session to 4 hours. So what that typically means is a meet will be divided in 2. So you'll have, let's say, all of the kids age 12 and under there in the morning time, all the kids age 13 and over in the afternoon time. That's one example of a format in which you're really accommodating more people than really the specific seating requirements that may be in the facility. Another example is a meet in which you have a preliminary session and a final session. And in that case, you've got all the swimmers or many of them that may be competing in 1 or 2 events during that morning session. That's really where you may have a very busy time in which you have a lot of spectators and swimmers in the pool. But again, those meets tend to be a little bit more spread out. Parents and swimmers kind of come and go as their events happen. And then the final session is really limited to only those kids that qualify for the final session, which could be only 16 to 24 kids per event. So again, even in a large meet in which you have, let's say, 1,000 swimmers and then the corresponding spectators, you wouldn't see all of those bodies in the facility at one time, even at the biggest meets.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Mhm.
Ryan, what's the seating capacity for, I guess, the biggest event that's held at the West Y? What do they have capacity for seating out there?
Well, I don't know if you guys know, we had a hard time getting that number because they don't use all of their bleachers. Only a couple sections are set forward. I know that Jeff's had experience during the high school season. Melanie, I don't know if you guys have a number.
They shut down half the area. They have a diving facility, or not a dive. They used to have diving, but they don't open the whole venue for seating. I don't know why.
But the most,
my guess would be 500.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a good guess.
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
if I can, I'm sorry, Ryan, that I've missed your presentations in the past, but have you put pencil to paper on this, and based on the number of people that you project being able to come into this facility, what kind of money revenue are you talking about versus expenses?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously when we're talking about events and seating capacity, those are not things that happen obviously on a daily basis, right? So from an operational standpoint, the model is entirely based on leasing lanes. So on a day-to-day basis, we are renting space to swim teams, to masters groups, to water polo teams. We're allowing day use. Public can come in and pay a day use to do that. So on a day-to-day basis, kind of the capacity, so to speak, of the facility is really not a big issue. During events, of course, really what happens there is you really are renting the facility out. By way of an example, the swim meet that I run in this Federal Way facility, which is one of the top facilities in the country, a 3-day meet rents out that facility for $18,000 to $20,000 for the weekend. Now, by no means could we rent our facility for that sort of dollars, but it kind of gives you an idea. Maybe a scaled back approach would be being able to rent that facility over a 3-day period. Those sorts of events are certainly supplemental to the budget, and we've kind of built them into our operational model to make sure that we can sustain, kind of a positive operation month over month.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mhm.
One of the other issues that's come forward is, again, we've kind of designed our facility to have pretty minimal amenities, and that's by design to keep it as inexpensive as possible, and, basic locker rooms and whatnot. We have, so 2 items on that. One is we have approached our architect about designing in additional space, either separate bathroom amenities for any sort of spectator use, or expanding the existing locker room space so we can get an idea of what that additional cost is. And we're certainly prepared to raise the capital that will be required for that. But by way of an example, the King County Aquatic Center, the KCAC, which is the pool in Federal Way, Washington, their locker rooms are no larger than what we've drawn here. If you go down to the swimmers area, it's a couple shower heads and a few benches, and that's it. Most of these big pools are not designed with a swimmer's comfort in the locker room in mind. It's all about water, right? What kind of pool is it and how fast is it? And a lot of it's about deck space and making sure that you can handle a lot of competitors at once. So we feel pretty confident that what we have designed and what we're trying to kind of enhance into that design will be more than adequate and comparable with other facilities that we've been to meets with. Again, comparability, it's really all about water space. It's all about deck space. At the end of the day, the state of Idaho does not have a single 50-meter swimming pool that is compliant to hold a meet in which you can, any USA meet requires certain depths. The West Y is not deep enough. The Twin Falls pool, which is the only other long course pool, is not deep enough on one end to hold any sort of major competition. This would be the only pool in the entire state that has the ability to host these meets. In the Northwest, there are really only a handful. Seattle being one, Mount Hood, Oregon has one. There's a few in the Portland area, Tualatin Hills. Kearns, Utah has a facility. But again, there exists no swimming pools in the entire state of Idaho that would meet the requirements to hold any sort of major USA swimming competition. And as Peter kind of pointed out, in terms of proximity to hotels and dining, so my office is in Bodo, and the other day I drove up to that property. Now, granted, I had the luxury of not hitting a single red light, but it took me 4 minutes from Bodo to get to that property. When I hit lights, it's maybe 8 minutes tops. So it's close to downtown. It is an easy drive to hotels. It's an easy drive to dining. Certainly the restaurants that are on site would stand to benefit from having not only the major events, but daily use as well. So it does sit pretty close. And again, when we look at when we go to a swim meet in Federal Way, we're driving 15 to 20 minutes to get to a hotel. When we have meets in Mount Hood, we're driving 20 to 30 minutes, sometimes longer, to get to a hotel. Yeah, and for that matter, those pools are nowhere near a metro area. They're off in areas, kind of suburbs or whatnot, away from kind of the major metropolitan area of the city. So The one thing we like about kind of, if you can envision back the picture that showed the pool up front with a lot of space and room to expand. But more importantly, when you have some of these larger meets, particularly in the summertime, anytime, of course, when the weather's nice enough to be outside, having that extra space outside is just a really huge benefit. You know, having bodies outside, having teams sit outside, the number of meets that we attend where, you know, people really, I mean, it's almost like a sea of tents. People put up their tents and kind of day camp, so to speak. No one's camping overnight, but they day camp and hang out for the day and be able to come into the facility and leave and whatnot. So having that space is great. Some of the age group meets that we'd like to host, including the Western Zone Championship, which encompasses all of the Western 16 states. That sort of meet really requires some having extra space. An athlete's village is created, so to speak, and that village kind of sits outside a facility. And so having that extra kind of acreage in the back is just really a perfect place to have an event like that. Again, we've mentioned some of these, but again, you know, you talked about the top tier facility, that's your Federal Way. You know, that was designed for the Goodwill Games, and it's held, you know, U.S. Nationals and U.S. Opens and just about every other major competition you could think of. But when it talks to the next tier, what we're trying to design here and put together is a pool that sits in that next tier of great pools, which is the Mount Hood and the Kearns and the Tualatin Hills. In other words, it's compliant. There just are not a lot of Olympic-sized compliant pools that you can have a large meets or large events like we're trying to do. So events. Again, we can really target just about anything short of U.S. Nationals and Olympic trials, but it expands a spectrum. Local swim meets, when we say local, it does mean that there are local kids there, but local meets also include out-of-town people. It includes people coming from Nevada and Eastern Oregon. It includes people coming from Eastern Idaho that would need to come in and you know, obviously dine and stay in hotels. So local meets aren't local in the sense that they're only local bodies. The majority of them may be, but there's still a portion of it that's going to include people that are traveling from out of town. High school meets. Now, I know one of the concerns is whether or not we're, you know, this is obviously duplicative, right? Right now, these meets are entirely hosted at the West YMCA in terms of competitions. The teams are practicing kind of all over the place, wherever they can find space, right? Bora Pool, Fairmont Pool, Downtown Y, West Y, and they're all kind of splitting time and getting not enough lanes and whatnot. Events are all pretty much, all the dual meets are hosted at the West Y, all of the state meets district. The one thing that they do have is a complete shortage of space, and anyone who has attended those meets will tell you it's a mad dash to get in there and get a seat. And every year there seems to be some sort of altercation with people trying to squeeze their way into the facility just to watch their kids swim. And so, you know, again, the design of this, of what we're trying to propose is not to move things away from the West Y. We just think there isn't enough space to do everything at the West Y. We think that the community would be better served if you could have half the meets there and half the meets at another place and allow more spectators to come in and enjoy watching their kids compete. There's some other meets that are more local. There's what's called the Snake River Championships. And without getting too far into the weeds, USA Swimming is pretty well structured. And so as an example, a local team in town, say the Boise Swim Club, is a member of an organization called a local swimming committee. And our local swimming committee, our LSC, is Snake River Swimming. Snake River Swimming is then part of USA Swimming. Snake River Swimming also competes in the Northwest section and in the Western Zone region. So USA Swimming has done a lot of work to try to kind of keep geographical areas together and aligned so that you can kind of put together competitions that include a large area, whether it be through a regional meet, which would include 4 to 5 states, to a Western Zone meet that may include 16 states, to a national meet that obviously would include everyone. So the Snake River Championship meet, again, those are essentially all of Southern Idaho, Northern Nevada, Eastern Oregon. A Northwest age group regional meet, those are again, all of the Northwest. That's Idaho, it's Washington, it's Oregon, it's Alaska, it's there are some teams from Northern California that may compete in that as well. Again, Masters Nationals kind of speaks for itself in the name. They of course have a couple of those meets during each year, and that's the idea, is to bring in the Masters group. Masters would be people that are, I think the age groups start at age 19 and then go on up to 112, I think is the last division. There's what they call the TYR Pro Series. Now this is they have a number of these meets spread around the country that really invites the elite, the best of the best swimmers that would compete in these tier Pro Series events. We'd also be able to have water club tournaments and camps. And we've also had interest expressed from both clubs and colleges in coming up and doing what they call a training trip, in which they spend a week on campus, use our pool to train, do other team sort of events. And they do these at other facilities around the country, and they've expressed interest in coming to Boise. I'm going to let somebody else talk here for a minute. I'm going to turn it over to Melanie so she can have a few comments about a meeting that we've had with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. We did kind of go to them and talk to them about what processes they've gone through relative to events in the Valley and maybe swimming in particular, and have asked them to push through some numbers. And rather than try to recant that conversation, I'll let her kind of fill in the gap a little bit, and then we can kind of look at some numbers that they put together for us.
Yeah, as I say, do you want to put the numbers on yet, or do you want to? I'm not going to walk you through the numbers specifically, but we did meet with Carrie and her team at CVB. Nick and I did last Friday, so we're still, working on, gelling the model, but it's come together. Her team was amazing, and they were very quick and responsive in helping Nick and I put together some numbers. Again, this being all Nick and Brandon, who's on Carrie's team, me just taking credit for it, but not having actually put the numbers on. Because we wanted to present the numbers in a way that made sense to you guys. Our understanding is, you're used to working with them and familiar with their model. So we have our own model, and the numbers were actually very similar to the numbers we'd already presented to you in prior meetings. But we did run it through their model. They helped us run numbers through their model. And so Ryan's gonna pull some of that up. And what we based these numbers off of were examples of those meets. We got real data from the meets that Ryan was telling you earlier could be potential meets that we would bring to this valley. And so we got real data points from a lot of those meets, and Brandon helped us run those through the model. So that's what you're looking at right here.
Obviously, they always put together a nice worksheet, and I wasn't sure what data you guys typically see in those. And so I'm happy to forward these to Pat, and he can get them out to your team. But what we were trying to compare to are the numbers that we had kind of put together from an impact standpoint. And as an example, just a local age group meet, which would bring in some out of town guests, typically a 300 to 400 person swim meet, has direct impact of 60,000, total impact of 112,000, job supported of 46. So their number of 112, and we were a little bit high on that one. We came in at 163,000 on the information we presented last month. When we look at a larger regional or zone meet, which was kind of in the 750 to 800 person competitor meet, much more of those being out of town guests, kind of a limited exposure to local use. Again, direct sales, 407,000, the total business impact, 765,000. Our numbers were only 597. So, their model is demonstrating a little bit higher economic benefit. And again, 931 room nights and job supported of 169. Kind of the next scale, I guess, is one of these larger sectional meets or an open invitational in which you could have, that 800 to 1,000 swimmers. I think this particular meet was 850 swimmers. Again, 450,000 in direct impact, 858,000 in total impact. over 1,000 room nights, 190 jobs. And again, the number that we pushed the same figures through our model, we got to 705,000. So if anything, I think our numbers were a little bit conservative, which made me feel pretty good.
Yep.
But the data is really great. It's good to see that the CVB was willing to put everything together through their model quickly for us so we could give this information to you. And I think it really turned out pretty well.
And Ryan, one thing that I would add just for the edification of this group, I mean, obviously we're open to questions on, the material in the model and, what's kind of underlying it. One of the things that Nick and I appreciated when we were speaking with, Carrie and her team at CVB is we're so close to swimming and what swimming competitions look like. And I think a lot of people kind of analogize it to, a football game or a soccer tournament, and they're not always the same from a demographic. We're kind of moving a little bit away from the quote unquote local vernacular. We think some of the reason why the numbers are a little off is when people think of, when they ran their numbers through, they used different proportions to like how many would be coming out of town, versus like how many people would be local and perhaps not needing a hotel room. In our experience, even at a local level meet, you'll draw people from out of town. You know what I mean? It won't just be the Treasure Valley. As Ryan mentioned earlier, it could be people, East Idaho, Northern Idaho, Nevada, Oregon, Washington. With swimming, it's a fine point, but people are driven by times. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily as much of a team sport, except at the high school level, about winning on the club you're on. It's more about getting this objective time. And so people will follow meets. You know what I mean? If they see that there's a good pool and there's an opportunity to get a time and they like that venue, they'll come with or without their team. So we just wanted to kind of point out that difference, that even when we're saying local meets, that there could be a fair bit of folks coming to those as well, even if they're not the higher level, regional or invitational that Ryan's got on this sheet.
So I'm going to back up just a few slides because I think there was probably some confusion as we walk through how we go about getting some of these meets. One too far.
Well, you had it a few slides higher or further back.
Yeah, I mean,
also, but yeah, here's
the way kind of the swimming process works isn't really, and I don't know how most events may happen, for example, within the convention center, or if there's an event that the city wants to bring in, if the CVB gets involved in that. But again, kind of going back to how swimming is structured, there's a very clear way in which you get a meet. For example, if you want to host a local meet, then you get on a calendar by going, in our case, if our club or team wanted to get a meet, we would go to the Snake River Board of Directors. We'd go to their House of Delegates. We'd say, we want to have this meet on this date, and we'd get placed on a calendar. That process is usually pretty easy. There's hardly ever too many meets. People love to go to meets. So getting on a calendar for a local meet is usually pretty straightforward. If you wanted to go to, for example, high school meets, again, this is something where athletic directors assign, and this might be a great, if Jeff's got some blanks to fill on here, but athletic directors assign are assigned meet dates. The district commissioners kind of put together those schedules and find the best place for any sort of meets. And again, I think the burden that's been placed on the Y to host every single meet has certainly been a challenge. I know that Nampa stepped up and held some meets at the Nampa Rec Center. I know that the Y held some meets at the Caldwell Y. Again, we'd have two Boise teams. For example, my son who goes to Bishop Kelly, BK would go swim, I don't remember who it was, Boise High, for example,
somewhere
in Caldwell. It makes no sense to be transporting a pool of Boise kids 35 miles out to Caldwell for a swim meet if that's something we can do locally. And that's just part of kind of that scheduling quirk, that trying to fit all of those competitions into a single venue becomes a real challenge.
Well, and the one thing I would add there, Ryan, while you're going on to the next slide, is high school swimming's, it's more analogous to, what you would see in other high school sports, right? Like football, et cetera, it's run through the high schools. However, unlike, you know, football, baseball, and other sports, every high school doesn't have water space, right? So they can't just walk out to their backfield and practice. And so in addition to the meets, some of these kids, and, you know, Jeff can probably speak more to it because he's actually coaches high school, he coaches Boise High. I mean, some of these kids are, you know, working out at 5 in the morning or 8 at night because that's just when the schedule will facilitate it, you know, at the various Ys. So there's definitely a need, you know what I mean, for that alone.
When you get to a kind of a larger meet, whether it be one of those regional meets, a senior meet or sectional meet, a Western zones, those things get awarded at a little bit higher level. So there's a section meeting, or there could be done at the USA Swimming House of Delegates meeting, which happens every September. Larger meets are bid out essentially 2 years in advance. So you attend the House of Delegates, you present that you want to host a meet, you provide whatever requisite information, which typically includes probably information we'd want to get from the CVB about hotels and availability of dining and things like that. They're always interested, of course, in other amenities that the city provides. And I think, you know, with Boise, you know, sitting on a river and our various rivers and parks, I mean, it's just a great attraction. Those things are bid out essentially 2 years in advance. So in order to get a 2023 section meet, we would bid on it this fall, for example. And some of the same thing would be true with national meets or those tier Pro Series meets. Those are essentially done a couple of years in advance. One thing that's important to note is that a lot of times there's only one place, one location bidding on those meets. It's not as popular as you'd think. A lot of times it's because the cost of renting those facilities. The King County is a great example. It's a great place to host a meet, but it's expensive. So you've got to have a good product in order to make it a profitable venture. But even if you have competition, you know, everyone's aware of everyone else in the room, so to speak. And so if we go into a bid and we lose a meet to Oregon, there's a very high probability we're going to get that meet the next year, right? They understand that we came to the table with the information and that next year we're going to get awarded that meet. So you don't typically see some of these larger meets hitting every single year in the same place. The Western Zone meet's a great example. It really rotates around to all the different local swimming committees and their locations every single year. Whether it be in, I think we were in Portland last year, I guess now 2 years ago. We were in Roseville the year before. It's been in Hawaii. It's been kind of all over the place. So that's a great example of a meet that kind of gets bid out every couple of years.
Madam Chair.
Mhm.
Ryan, can you go back to that last slide? Yes. So these economic impact breakdowns, what makes these up as far as number of meets, you know, like per year, et cetera? What are you factoring into that?
So a local age group meet will typically happen, you know, we would certainly envision at our facility probably 4 to 6 of those a year. And to be clear, those would not be in conflict of the meets that the Y hosts on an annual basis. The Y has 2 meets that they do every year: their spring fling and their Thanksgiving meet. God, they've been around certainly since Jeff and I were swimming.
Well, I want to make sure, Peter, maybe you understood this and everybody else does, but these are each for a meet. You know what I mean? So when you see the local, that's not us assuming 4 to 6 a year. That's for a meet.
That was my question.
Yeah, and so however many we have, multiply that. So if we have
Correct.
2, that number would double.
Okay.
These are per event. And as Melanie said, these were taking events that we would bid for and taking the exact number of swimmers from that meet and having the CVB put it into their model.
So that's one weekend.
Right. So a local age group meet, again, that's one local age group meet. We would see 4 to 6 of those, preferably at our venue, in addition to the events that the West Y would coordinate.
And then the second and third one would be more like 1 to 2 of those a year.
Correct. I think, you know, certainly the first year or two, we would probably see 1 of those each year. once people start to learn about the venue and understand the type of facility it is, and that we can demonstrate that we're hosting a quality event, then we would see probably more regularity of those larger meets.
Okay, thanks for that. And then I had another question. I'm kind of looking at this through the same lens as Boise Center with our conventions and then local events. Have you thought about, or maybe would you factor in having, you know, groups that would have swim lessons there or any of those sort of things to add to your revenue?
Yes, absolutely. So in order to make a pool successful, you have to attack it from a lot of different angles. And it can't just be competitive swimming and swim meets. It has to be a robust lesson program that happens every single day. It has to be the person who wants to come in and some laps. I know that Pat's excited to put a Speedo on and come down and some laps with us.
That's what's driving my question.
It is about trying to find as many uses and programming it appropriately so everyone gets the space that they truly need. Again, that's high school swimming, it's swim clubs, it's masters, it's day-to-day laps use, it's physical therapy. It's a very robust lessons. And I know I say it every time and it's a broken record, but the second leading cause of death amongst kids ages 5 and younger is drowning. And we have the cure. It's teaching kids to swim. It's a very important part of our mission, is making sure that everyone in the valley has an opportunity to learn to swim. Yes, lessons bring in revenue. Part of our platform would certainly be able to provide any sort of financial support that someone may need to make sure that a kid can learn to swim if they're not economically able to pay for that. So your point, you have to have, it's a multi-tiered approach, right? You've got to fill the pool in every way you can.
Yep. Thank you.
Ryan, Melanie et al., I appreciate the validation of the CVB model. I think I was one of the people that asked for that, and I appreciate you doing it. And I too am pleased with them, Larry, your figures. I'm not sure where you're going with the presentation. I assume we're going to see revenue forecasts, expense forecasts, capital progress, raising money in later slides.
I did not include the operational numbers in this slide because I brought it to the last meeting, but I'm happy to forward that information to the group, to Pat, to forward to the board so you guys can see the operational figures. And from a capital, I mean, happy to answer that now. I mean, from a capital standpoint, you know, like I said, our commitment originally was to make sure that we brought in our, $2 million in capital. To date, again, we have not addressed capital since August. We have 1.1 million committed. We actually have an anonymous source that's ready to write a very large check once we have a few other commitments and have a property aligned. So
on top of the 1.1.
On top of the 1.1. So at the end of the day, I can commit to you that we have all the necessary money to take care of our end of this project.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question, or are you done? Ryan, when you say you have 1.1 million, is that right?
Correct.
And you've got that money in the bank or committed?
That's committed. We don't have anything deposited yet. We've been very careful about not asking people to write checks until we have all of our P's and Q's lined up.
Okay, thanks.
Did I answer your question okay, Jody, or need some more information?
Well, I might as well, since we're jumping ahead a little. I'm wondering what the structure will be. Who will manage the construction and who will manage the operation, and what the district's role will be, and what, if any, payments you would, if we bought the property, what sort of payments would we receive? The last time I saw the operational assumptions, I didn't see a line that said payment to the district. Maybe if you're planning to get there in due course, I can wait, but otherwise maybe we can talk about that.
Nope, we've got it. I mean, so structurally, we have a couple entities established. One is Idaho Competitive Aquatics. That is essentially call it your for-profit entity that is, essentially raising the capital and is intending to build the facility. We have a separate entity called the Greater Boise Aquatic Foundation that will operate as a nonprofit and will help provide funding from a nonprofit standpoint and funding for some lessons or other avenues there. The concept would be that we would actually be leasing the property and or improvements from the district. And our operational budget does include a line that says either land lease or at the point when we drew up the budget, it was either a line for debt service and or leasing. So we have a lease line in our operational budget that would include lease payments to the district for use of that property.
And I guess the other, what are we looking for today in terms of action by the district?
Well, I think what we're hoping for is that we can move forward with the purchase of the property up on Finley Avenue. We have a pretty big concern that land is sparse and becoming more expensive. And we're concerned that if we don't take every opportunity we can to acquire this property, that finding something else suitable may not be possible in the near future. So we're essentially asking the group today if they're willing to commit to acquiring this property or certainly putting in an appropriate bid to purchase the property.
I would say one thing, and I'm sorry to interrupt Jody, to say another purpose of today was in some of the informal discussions we've had with both, folks related to GBAD and CVB, is that there was just a lot of questions, right? When the article came out, there was a lot of questions that people were fielding. And so, we put the presentation together also to just, create the narrative around some of those questions so that maybe everyone's a little bit better, informed or educated or can direct them to us versus you guys bearing the brunt of some of those questions that you just may not be close enough to the answers on.
Yeah, I think for, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, for everyone's benefit, I'd like to recount what I think Jim Walker and I were trying to accomplish in our motion at the last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I think we wanted to send a message that the board appreciates this project. This project fits within the scope of what the Greater Boise Auditorium District was created to do. And it hits our scope in terms of what we can spend. So we wanted to issue a statement that showed support for the project and hopefully to increase traction for other fundraising and whatever that means. But clearly, we're not going to actually appropriate the money until we have a business model. And these.
I'm sorry, Jody, I'd even go one step further. I don't think we can vote on this with what we've received today as far as a business model. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jody. It's just I'm having trouble with my phone.
I think what we tried to say was we're supportive of the project. We're in for up to 5 million potentially. But of course, we have to go through a normal forecast, all the typical financial analysis that one does before they write a check.
Oh, totally. I think we all understand that.
I think we have I think Pat has worked to draft a letter to you that we hope would be sufficient support for a bid on the property.
Which would be great and very much appreciated. And obviously we want to make sure we get all of the information that we need to you guys. I think that we do have that business model. We do have that operational budget prepared. We do have the capital available to do the project. And so whatever additional information we need to get to you, we can certainly provide. And certainly my apologies if that was expected to be here today. We did include operational information at the last meeting. I didn't think to include it in our presentation this time as well. But I will get that information to Pat in addition to the other items to facilitate out or to disperse out to the group.
Anne Marie, what's a typical package for the board to consider an expenditure like this look like?
I would expect to see a business plan, you know, that goes through and talks about management and earnings and the purpose of the facility, the sources, the assumptions made in the, you know, in the budget. If we are, I mean, we essentially are becoming a lender in the sense that we're funding the purchase of the real estate. And so I would expect to see a package similar to what they would present to a lender.
And that would go out 5 years or 10 years or 20 years?
At least, I would say 3 to 5. I think one of the issues might be, since we're a government entity, how to, while it's confidential, and maybe Mike Stoddard can answer this, how do we not give away proprietary information that might be included in a business plan?
Yeah, and we would certainly, we'd start with the top line that quantified the things that Peter was talking about into a revenue estimate per year for each of those years, made up of all the components that we mentioned. And so I think we can get to the letter today, and then if we are successful with the property, go forward with, but it'll be a non-binding letter of intent anyway on the property, right?
Well, it'd be a PSA, it'd be a purchase and sale agreement, but again, we have a due diligence
But-
period.
Yeah, with a
60
due
days.
diligence.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Ryan?
It would be a purchase and sale agreement, again, with that we would have at least 60 days of due diligence in which we'd have an opportunity to continue to evaluate the suitability of the property, and could obviously withdraw at any time within those 60 days.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and I don't know, Ryan, if you've got additional content on your presentation, but I know that we sent you a lot of questions ahead of time. You know, so I mean, I'd still like to get to some of those questions. Or if you want to finish your presentation, they may answer. I know they've already answered some of the questions that were presented to you.
However you'd like to go, honestly, we do have some more slides that I think will address some of those questions. I do want to be clear that we do have all the data, and I will get it to Pat. We'll do that as soon as we can, so you guys have all the materials that we've kind of made available. And then he can work with Mike on the best way to get that out to the respective board members. So if you guys wanted to do normal Q&A, we're certainly open to that, and I'm certainly happy to kind of flip through a few more slides that may answer some of those questions in advance.
Why don't you go ahead and flip through the rest of your slides, and then I can go through and hit some of these questions that maybe you didn't address. But then just, you know, to kind of reiterate Jody's point on pro forma information, you know, that's something that I think we want to dig into a little bit more, certainly. And from our perspective, I know we're going to have to run numbers on our side, because I know you have a line item in there for rent, but we need to see if that would even make sense. You know, if that number that you have makes sense for us. You know, or something, you know, would we want a different rent amount, something like that, that we would just, we haven't gotten that far yet. So I think we need to dig into that a little bit deeper.
Certainly. So this next slide, unfortunately, the formatting didn't come through, and so it's difficult to read. I'm just going to kind of walk you through the information, so you can probably try to ignore some of the data because it's kind of jumbled here, but there was a study done in 1990 that explored the need for aquatic facilities in Boise. And what became of that study, of course, was the Boise City Aquatic Center at the West Y. At that point in time, they used a population base of 130,000 people. Today, the metropolitan area is 730,000 people. At that time, we had 5 outdoor pools that were only open for 5 months out of the year. The National Recreation Association recommends that you have at least one annual facility for every 35,000 residents. So that computed to 0.5 pools per 35,000 residents back in 1990. So fast forward today, we now have 730,000. We have 1 indoor pool. We actually only have 4 operational outdoor pools now. That computes to 0.128 pools per 35,000. So only 12% of what the recommended amount is. And a comparable example may be the city of Colorado Springs, which has a metropolitan area of 430,000. They have 10 different USA Swimming Clubs competing at 10 different facilities, most of which are also available for public use. I think we've touched on some of these. I know there are some questions about use. Again, nearly 100% of this daily use is local, right? The events that come in for specific events, obviously that's when we bring outside people in. But from a public standpoint, from a local public standpoint, it's a public venue available for public use on a daily basis. And again, it's multi-use. It's swim team, it's lap swim, it's physical therapy, all those things. And then of course, from an event standpoint, that 4 to 6 times annually. Partnerships, a lot of them obviously are swimming related. We've talked about the kind of various divisions of USA Swimming. Of course, there's US Master Swimming, there's USA Water Polo, Tier Swimming, Speedo, all those kind of key marquee swimming names are certainly part of the relationships we have. And we don't just say those names in jest, we truly have those relationships. As a great example, Jeff and I both sit on the board of Snake River Swimming. My father was president of USA Swimming. One of our investors is highly invested in US Water Polo and has connections with Tony Acevedo, 68 Sports, another water polo organization. These are all people that are vested in the important organizations that help make these facilities successful. That list on the right are all organizations that have come to us and said, we will come to your facility. Teams from Arizona, teams from Utah, teams from California, teams from Illinois, teams from New York. University of Texas has said they'd come and do a training trip. These are all organizations that we have personal relationships with that would be interested in coming to Boise for a competition. And we've talked about timeline, right? We're mostly concerned about availability of land and trying to lock something down. We certainly are looking at other options as many as we can. We're not stopping just because we're exploring Findlay. We want to explore every possible area out there. And again, that's working with county governments, state governments, city governments. We're having all of those conversations as regularly as we can. As a great example, we were able to sit down and have a meeting with the Expo Idaho people. They're still kind of, I guess, discussing the concept of having some sort of sports complex at their area. To date, they haven't expressed interest in ours, but I know that they're kind of working through their regular process. We've talked with property owners and business owners in Eagle. Unfortunately, those of course sit outside the district, but again, we're just looking for any place that we can find a home for our facility. And so, yeah, I know that this is a relatively new project to the district. We've been working on it for quite a while. And so we're just really kind of still trying to be full steam ahead and trying to kind of get this vision in the ground. But that doesn't mean we're not willing to listen to any other option that's out there. We're just trying to make sure we don't miss out on something that might be a really good fit for the district, for the city, and for us. And that was kind of the conclusion of our slides. And there's probably some gaps in some of those that you guys might have questions on, and we're ready and willing to answer anything you might throw at us.
Well, certainly since this is time sensitive for that, the property, mentioning the Expo Idaho, the fairgrounds area, what would your interest be in that property, and how long would you be willing to wait if that did become an available option? Certainly from the synergistic perspective, that would be nice to have other sports facilities around you, and depending on what they end up doing with that parcel of land could include, maybe some hotels and, some additional benefits out there. So just wanted to chat with you about that potential.
I mean, I think one of the reasons why we've really targeted the type of pool that we put together, again, as inexpensive as we can, meeting all the requirements to hit the events and competitions that we want, trying to make the amenities as necessary as required, but again, as minimal. The idea is that we're trying to move the project forward as quickly as we can because there's such a lack of available space. That doesn't mean we're not willing to listen or wait, but we're really trying to not make this a 3 to 4 year project, right? This isn't a $20 million aquatic facility that would take that sort of time frame. Again, we are extremely confident that we have the capital to get the pool taken care of. And so we're really just pushing this obviously as hard as we can to find a home or a location. But yeah, I mean, if Expo Idaho is at the table and wants to discuss and they have a timeline that might seem amenable to us, then we certainly want to listen and talk to them about it. To date, I don't think we've heard that timeline. I think that's been the hesitancy, if anything, that we have.
Have you guys reached out to the Ada County Commissioners at all regarding that?
Well, we did through Pat and his contact out at Expo Idaho, Bob Batista, and he was reaching out directly to the commissioners to see if we could have a meeting with them. To date, they have not been willing to sit down with us yet.
Yeah, we had, Kristen, we had prior to November for the election, but then the election obviously shook things up a little bit.
Okay. Something, and I wasn't sure, I know you guys talked about high school meets. Do high school meets pay rent to rent water, or is that something that the community does free to those high school teams?
Yeah, the districts pay, each, Boise School District pays the Y.
Okay.
No, it's not free. Yeah.
Okay.
No, and I know that, and Kristen, I know that like BK, for example, was spending several thousand to rent Fairmont just for practice. Like not even for the meet, just for practice.
Okay. What, and I don't think you touched on this, what examples really that you've talked about as far as some of the meets would be new business, or some that, or would it, what are events that are already hosted by the Y or another facility? So what new events would your facility bring in versus what's already here?
I said, do you want to do that one?
Aside from the high school meets, this would be 100% new business. The West Y cannot host the events that we're seeking to host because their pool isn't adequate to host them. The high school meets obviously are existing there. We're not creating new high school meets. So that would be the only kind of component that isn't repetitive. We would not be seeking to replace any of course, their normal invitational meets. On occasion, I would say once every 2 years, the Boise Y swim team will host one of the Snake River Championship meets. And so that would just become part of a normal, bid process, whether or not the Y could host it or us. But again, that's a once every 2 years, maybe that meet would be hosted at one site or another. So in general, pretty much all the meets that we kind of outlined for you, with the exception of high school, would be new business and new traffic to Boise.
One thing I would add to this, Ryan, sorry, Kristen, and Jeff and I were talking offline about this, and Jeff could actually speak with more authority, but the high school season currently is very short and has few meets because of pool space capacity. So the high schools have 4 to 5 meets where they could probably have, I don't know, you could speak to this better than me, Jeff, and then JV. I mean, like they don't even have a JV or a really quality program under varsity because it's hard for them to hold those meets contemporaneously, and so they just become a mess. But Jeff, you're more the authority.
I mean, I just know, who knows how many what do they have? 16 games for basketball. They have 8 football games. We have 5 dual meets. It's Tuesday nights only.
Most teams have 2 or 3 buys because they can't have more than 3 teams at the pool at any time.
Yeah. So the beauty of this is, high school, during the high school season, we could host a meet any day of the week, So the high school there'll be a lot more meets than what the Y is doing right now. I mean, a lot of states have a preseason invitational, which the whole state will come to. That's one thing I want to do is, being involved with high schools. I want to have kind of a, whatever you want to call it, preseason jamboree or whatever, but invite the whole state to come down and have a preseason, see where everybody's at, early September, even late August.
Okay, and then you kind of talked about the other facilities around there and really not necessarily competing with the Federal Way facility. And thanks for expanding upon the bleachers and the seating and locker room space. It's good because those that aren't in the swim community don't quite understand how swim meets work. So I appreciate your clarification there. Some things that I saw that, these other facilities have, or questions that we would have maybe moving forward for expansion. Would concessions be something that would be, of interest? I know we talked about diving well. It looks like that Federal Way facility actually has some event space and they have some outdoor space there. So I know you mentioned briefly outdoor space, but maybe would you be adding turf there? So what would be the additional features that you would like to add in the future? And does this Finley Property Avenue facilitate that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously every venue's a little bit different. And, the Federal Way is an example of a facility that they have a very small concession area that's really not utilized much by the attendees. Again, most swimmers are there to compete and then they get out of there to get to their hotel or to go eat at a restaurant or whatnot. So on-site concessions are not a huge concern. In fact, when you go to a meet, typically the host, it seems crazy, but typically the host will have a table, not unlike this one, in which they sell bagels and bags of chips off of. That's the extent of most swim team concessions. So if we added any sort of thing like that, then yeah, it would be a huge plus or benefit. And we're certainly not opposed to it. I think it's just a matter of is it feasible? And again, trying not to bite off too much now, but making sure we have room and space to do that in the future. Yeah, huge thing is food trucks. The West Y does that a lot. They bring in food trucks, and this would be coffee trucks. That's essentially the West Y, the Y team. They really don't operate any of their own concessions at this point. They just bring in other venues or food trucks come in and typically get a percentage, right? They'll get a 5 or 10% cut of whatever sort of revenue that those entities make while on site. So that would certainly be the game plan up front. Any ability to expand on that in the future would certainly be great. In terms of usable space, again, so a convention like the Federal Way pool has an adjacent convention center. I've been going to meets there since I was, 12 years old and never once have set foot inside that convention center. It's really a separate part of that facility and is not used in any form for a swim meet. Honestly, this was obviously a much better venue for those things. If you go to a larger meet like of course, we're not a YMCA entity, but the YMCA national meet, if you go to those meets, for example, in Greenboro, they will have a separate site in which you would come and do registration and things like that. That's certainly something where, a convention center like this would be utilized and doesn't have to be on site. But again, the open area in the back, I mean, that's really a key component. It doesn't mean that we have to put down turf. I think there's an area there that we would want to, at least up front, is have some kind of more green space so that if we had a need for outside seating or access, that would be a great way to do it. But I don't think it's necessary to finish the entire extra, 2 acres there up front. It would be doing just enough to make sure that we have acceptable usable space, and again, having the option to expand in the future. So that's really what makes that site kind of exciting, is having that space back there.
Yeah, can you kind of break down the build out that you have on your picture there? Is that about an acre and then you would have 2 acres left over, or is it kind of half and half?
Yeah, I don't know if I can get back to that slide. I'll try to get to it. But again, the pool itself, so just the pool itself and the surrounding deck sits on almost exactly 1 acre. And then, of course, we do have to have, roughly, we've got sketching about 7.5 acres in kind of that front parking area. There we go. So that wedge up on the top right is essentially kind of your designated parking. That should leave us with at least 1.5 acres, almost 2 acres in the back for available expansion.
Okay, thank you. And you have yet to reach out to the neighbors around there?
Well, we have not yet because we're really trying to wait till we get to a point where we've got a PSA in hand and it becomes part of our due diligence. I think we're been very nervous and wary about getting over our skis, right? We've been very contemplative with our approach, not only with you guys, but with any part of this process. And we didn't want to be going to neighbors before we even had an opportunity to truly know if having the site was reasonable in due course. So if we're able to have a PSA in place during that 60-day due diligence, then yes, we will talk to every single one of those businesses in the area to make sure that we have a good starting relationship with them.
And certainly address any NIMBY issues.
Yes.
Okay. And I know you mentioned it, you know, some of those events would be 2 to 3 years out for those larger ones. How often do they repeat in a particular city?
Those are annual meets, yes. A great example, and they had a section call, an annual call this year because they didn't have a meeting. And there was no one willing to host one of the meets. And literally on the call with 20 people attending, they said, is there anyone willing to host this meet this year? So now this year is a little bit of an anomaly, but these things don't get bidded on every single year. If we're willing and interested to do this, we can bid on these meets every single year. It doesn't mean we're going to get it every year, but if we do a really good job, then they're going to want to come back. Right? That's why people want to go back to Federal Way. That's why people want to go back to Mount Hood, because they do a good job, they host a good meet. And I can assure you, if you talk to anyone in the swimming community, there's one thing that Boise does really well, and it's host a good swim meet. So we're confident in our ability to do that and get the repeat business.
And Ryan, one thing I would add is, Kristen, a lot of some of those meets are run by similar governing bodies. So if, for example, they decide not to give us the spring meet, and we bid for both the spring and the summer one, they might say, oh, you don't get the spring one, but we'll give you the summer one because you bid for both. You know what I mean? So all of those meets that Ryan listed, a lot of them have very similar governing bodies that are making the decision for where to host the meet. And they actually like to have them move around. The swimmers like to move around and go to different locations. They don't really like going to the same location year after year after year. They're going to travel. They like to go to different places.
So I would say, so then how many times do you think it would repeat in Boise? Like every 5 years, maybe potentially get those events?
You have to understand there's probably like 12 possible meets we could be bidding for, not just 2. You know what I'm saying? So that's what we probably do 2 to 4 a year, but that's of, 12, 20 different possibilities.
Okay.
Not just 2.
Right. And regarding the Findlay property, does it check all of your boxes, or is it more so because it checks most of them and it's available? And I know we're talking about lack of land in Boise and that, but it's like, is this just because it's available that you want to move quickly on it, or is it actually a pretty ideal location for you?
Well, I was certainly skeptical at first in terms of what I would consider as pretty far east. It's not downtown, of course. I live in Hidden Springs, so it's a little bit of a stretch for me to drive from home to get there. But it's extremely accessible. And we've really spent the last, month trying to drive there from every possible location we can. Whether it be from, for example, we did the drive from Bora High or Bishop Kelly to see how a couple different routes to get there. We've done it from downtown. We've driven it down Broadway. We've driven it down Capitol. It is extremely accessible, which is really key. The idea is that we want people, it's not just the events, of course, it's day-to-day use, right? The operation of this facility is going to be sustained by the day-to-day use. So as long as we can get people to come there every day for a swim team practice or the lap swim or whatever the case may be, then we're successful. And it is very easy to get to. Again, having access to a grocery store across the street and restaurants and the other amenities that are on Federal Way. And kind of, if you haven't driven up Federal Way, it's amazing to me how much growth and how much improvements happened along there. So yeah, I mean, I think if you had asked me this question 3 months ago, I would have said, I don't know if it's my favorite, but the more I drive up to that property, the more I certainly like it.
Great, thank you. And in your discussion with the CVB, did they identify any opportunities that have come to them that they have not been able to pursue because there was a lack of pool facility?
No, that wasn't part of the discussion, Kristen. But what was part of the discussion that Nick and I found interesting is that the pool community doesn't go to them, period. We were the first group that's ever even gone to them, you know what I mean? And talked to them about swim meets and things that happen in this area. So not the answer to your direct question, but I mean, we didn't ask that question, but they didn't share that data either.
Okay, but it's definitely a relationship that you could continue to pursue and.
Oh, 100%. There were a lot of things that we just didn't even appreciate that they could, you know, we could benefit from that relationship.
Yeah, great, thank you. I know you mentioned you had some study numbers from 1990. Have you, or would you consider hiring a consultant to do a study such as CSL?
Well, I mean, we could. I mean, we could certainly spend the money to do that study. I think the study would say exactly what this study says. It's remarkable. And I don't just say that in jest, but again, I provided this study to Pat. I'm happy to have it sent out to you. You could read it and you could replace the dates and you would think you were reading today's report. With the exception of the mass expansion of our metropolitan area, obviously from 130,000 to 730,000. So the reality is that there just is not the aquatic space in town. It is a need by every metric that's presented by any national organization. And if you guys said, look, we're going to do this project, but you have to do the study, then yeah, we're going to spend the money and do the study. It's going to say exactly what we're telling you right now.
Okay, thank you. You kind of touched upon this, but the percentage use of local use clubs, swim lessons, schools versus the competitive events. And with that being, you know, local competitive, regional, national, kind of breaking down the percentage use that you anticipate.
So again, daily operational, it's 100% local. I mean, these are, you know, day to day, it's local clubs, local water polo teams, local day use, local physical therapy. With respect to the events, again, it's going to depend on the type of event, right? As we've kind of outlined, if you have a local meet that might have 400 swimmers, 200 to 250 of those are going to be the Treasure Valley. 150 are going to be from Eastern Idaho. If you're having a regional meet, then the number of local swimmers actually decreases a little bit because typically those are tied to qualifying standards. But obviously there's a greater number of outside competitors coming to the area. Again, so for those 4 to 6 events, I think you're going to find that the lower tiered events are going to be the majority local. The higher tiered events, the faster events, so to speak, those are going to be tiered much more towards visitors coming to Boise.
Okay. And it sounds like on some of these events, you would need to coordinate with the Y to maybe split pool use, you mentioned?
I think that would only be with respect to the high school season, right? I think again, you're notifying the district or the athletic directors that there's another facility available. And to Jeff and Melanie's point, I think it's probably, if anything, maybe an opportunity to expand that season, provide more meets and opportunities rather than probably reducing the total number of meets at the Y. It might just simply be a complementary addition to that season. But again, it would just be with respect to the high school season.
Okay. Well, I know that I would certainly be interested what your conversations would be continuing with the gentlemen out the fairgrounds and or the county commissioners to see, you know, if there's any interest from them on the property over there in the fairgrounds. And I think there's a lot of work to do between now and 60 days before you run out of your timeline. So I think I echo Jody, certainly not willing to put forth a motion to vote on writing a check today. But I know that there was mention of a letter, and Pat, Mike, Can you describe a little bit more, and maybe Peter can jump in on what this letter is?
Christian, I think the first thing is just have Ryan explain from the due diligence process what it is that he needs. And then Mike and Peter can verify that information. So
Yeah, I mean, essentially what's happened is that there's now at this point multiple buyers of the property, and everyone's exhausted their exclusivity period. And so it's kind of what the buyer has done is taken a step back and said, we're willing to accept one more offer from each of the respective parties. And they gave us a list of exactly what they were looking for, what they wanted in the PSA, absent of course a purchase price, the respective terms. And then one of those items was essentially verification of available funds. Everyone at the table is essentially coming with cash. No one's financing the deal. And so from our agent's perspective, the best source for us would be to say, have a letter that said that the auditorium district has the available cash to make the acquisition.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Mike, I think I'll.
Sure. Yeah, Madam Chair. Yeah, so just a couple of things. I think going back to Mr. Olson's point earlier, just kind of reminding us what the board's resolution was or motion was at the last meeting. You know, the board indicated the support for range for up to $5 million, but importantly, subject to board approval ultimately when a final proposal was made. And so I think that to the extent we would provide a letter or other things right now, obviously it would be effectively referencing that motion, indicating that the board's, again, I think as Jody mentioned earlier, the board has indicated its support, but there will obviously ultimately need to be additional due diligence and final board approval. So I think that'd be the gist of what the letter would say. And I think the other thing to kind of keep us on track in terms of where we are in the legal process is, I'm assuming, Ryan, that what we'd have would be the PSA would at this point still be signed by you all, with the idea that assuming we got through all these hoops, ultimately that would be assigned to us, correct?
That's correct. The PSA is actually drawn up in my name, so it says Ryan Stratton or assigns. So yeah, I mean, we're going through on the PSA agreement with our entity and with the ability to assign that to the district at the appropriate time.
And then although I know Peter has effectively kind of a conflict here if we were voting on something, which I don't think we are, but I guess I would kind of ask his thoughts generally, kind of in a general real property standpoint here. I mean, this is, I think, pretty standard in terms of having a PSA, but with a diligence period and subject to various conditions. So there's nothing unique about sort of saying, yes, we're interested, subject to diligence. Is that correct, Mr. Oliver?
Yes. Yeah, that's standard practice. And, also reiterate, what Ryan has stated, this call for final and best offers is, we're seeing that more and more in our market, given the activity level. So yeah, everything that's been outlined is very standard and normal. And I just, in general as well, during the due diligence, the buyer has the ability to terminate the contract if things are not, the findings are not good, or if there's some other issues that arise. So that's all normal.
And so, Madam Chair, I would actually say, I mean, I think Pat was being, well, appropriately, but we're really very cautious in terms of wanted to make certain the board, kind of knew this was out here and that we might be providing this letter, because I think, again, it's really not doing, I don't want to say not doing any more, but I guess it's really just reflecting the board's actions at the last meeting in terms of indicating support and that this project generally fits within the, the scope of what we're talking about. The board's been talking about in subject to diligence. So I don't think it's a further step forward. Basically, I think it's kind of explaining what the board's decision has been so far in the position so far.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So just to simplify, it would be basically stating that at this last meeting here was our motion of what we just said we would do, up to 5 million, but not binding the district to any funds or future decision, correct? Non-binding.
Right, it's our ongoing commitment to work through a due diligence process, and I think that's what we'd be doing over, well, we and Ryan's, I guess Ryan personally for the moment, could be doing over the next 60 days.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would, you know, entertain a motion to have us put together a letter such as that for Ryan's group, but I think at this point, that's all we'd be willing to vote on today.
I'll do that. I would move that we supply Ryan with a letter adequate to convince these sellers that we're for real and we'll be there to support them.
Okay, great. Do I have a second? Is Hai on?
Is Hai still on?
No, he's not.
And Peter, given, I'll just kind of address this. Peter, given the fact that this is a TOK property, I'm assuming you would like to abstain?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So-
Madam Chair, even if Peter doesn't feel comfortable voting on this, I think it's, again, this is within the scope of your last motion. So as long as the sense of the board is that this is appropriate, I don't know that you need a formal motion. If Peter wants to abstain, I guess.
So yeah, because I'm just thinking, you know, with Hai gone, I don't know if we could accomplish that.
Right. And so again, I think this is within the scope of the board's motion from last session. So as long as that effectively, I think Pat was here, and Pat and I were here basically to say, gee, this doesn't cause you all any concern. I don't think we need to.
Okay, so we don't need to necessarily vote on approval of writing some sort of a letter?
Correct.
Okay, all right, well then. Any other questions, Peter, Jody, at this time? I mean, I think that we have a lot of due diligence as well ahead of us with Ryan's group.
Chris, pardon me, Kristen, if I might.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and draft the letter. I'll make sure Mike signs off on it. I'll send a copy to, once I send it to Ryan, I'll make sure that all the board has a copy. Pardon me. And that the presentation today, I'll make sure that gets forwarded on to you as well. And I still have the presentation from last month, Ryan, that I can send as well. So if there's any other information you want to send me, I'll forward that on too. But I'll get that letter done right away. And again, with Mike's approval, I'll get it over to Ryan and again, make sure all the board has a copy of it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jody, Peter, anything else at this time?
Nope.
All right. Thank you for your comments. And Ryan's group, thank you for providing that additional information. And sounds like we will certainly be in touch, moving forward. All right. Seeing no other business before the board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.